This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Lisa Mateo, and Michael Barr. Thank you for joining us across the nation, around the world, on Apple, CarPlay, and Android. Thank you for joining on those two new modern technical vehicles. Which do you have? Do you have Apple CarPlay?
Apple CarPlay is
CarPlay?
in my new ride.
Okay, so you can just switch right over to June Grosso on
pop it
the
right
trial.
in. Exactly.
Or, you know, the big take with David Gurr, the rest of
exactly.
it. Good morning on YouTube. Search Bloomberg Podcasts. You can subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts, and they get you right to us each and every morning. It's building out. I think we need some more fear to build it up more.
All right,
we do better when there's like angst out there and worry.
Exactly.
And there's a little more worry. I use the VIX as the thermometer. There we were 12, and the VIX now 14.48. But Paul, you mentioned it earlier. All that matters in the next 48 hours. Where are we at 8:31 or even 10 a.m. tomorrow morning?
Sure, exactly right, Tom. We got PCE deflator coming out here tomorrow, and again, the month-to-month number, 0.3%. That seems to be the kind of the consensus. You kind of put that on an annual basis. 2.8% would be kind of the inflation call there, similar to where we saw last month. Is that kind of where we are? And we know the Fed would like to get that number down closer to 2%.
Good morning, Mark Benioff, keeper of the mandolins. He's a great mandolin cutter. He's got a great
All right, I'm looking at Salesforce. Anurag Rana at Bloomberg Intelligence has always told me, you look at Salesforce, such a great software story. You got 56 analysts recommending or covering the stock. 40 of them have a buy on the stock.
It's getting hammered.
It's getting hammered here today, down 16% pre-market. The revenue guidance a little bit light there.
Let's get right to it. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
Good morning. Yeah, futures extending their declines as Treasury yields near the highest level this year. Right now we have NASDAQ futures down about 0.3%, Dow futures down 0.8%, and S&P futures down 0.4%. The 2-year yield 4.96%, down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.59%, and that's down 1 basis point. Looking at commodities, we have spot gold that's higher at $2,340 an ounce. We have Brent crude $83 a barrel, WTI crude $78 a barrel. Shares of software maker Salesforce, you said it, Paul, they're lower, down 15%. It warned the current quarter is going to likely see the slowest sales growth in the company's history. Meanwhile, HP shares, they're higher. They're up about 5%. They reported a net revenue beat. And a ton of retail earnings expected today. Let's start with Foot Locker. They're up 13%. Reported earnings surpassed expectations. There you go. You got to get those new sneakers. Then you have Dollar General up 8%. They reported a beat too. Coming up, we have a lot more to get to, including Best Buy. We'll get to that in just a bit. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
I'm in tears, Paul. I'm emotional this morning. It's great. I love when our wonderful guests send in notes from the past. This is from my Ute folks. Good morning, Samuel Coffin, the fabulous Maury Harris of UBS, who built all the foundation there.
Payne Weber originally.
He hired years ago this young whippersnapper, Drew Matus. And what's cool here is someone like Matus, folks, now over at MetLife. It's like Juan Soto. He went from the Padres to the Yankees. Over with the New York Yankees, Drew Matus gives me a research report from 8 years ago. Drew Matus, why are you pulling out a UBS report from 8 years ago, my 3 favorite canaries? Tweet for us.
There's still some of the best things to look at in terms of whether the economy is improving or getting worse. And unfortunately, what we're seeing in those indicators, which are claims, the ISM reports, and core bank loans, are all signs that the economy is beginning to weaken, which I think has become more evident in things like the payroll report. But with the idea of kind of the soft landing having taken hold, or the no landing having taken hold, this is just something that I think points in the opposite direction and maybe suggests that weakness is going to be forthcoming.
Will we finally see it in the jobs report coming up here early June?
I think we're going to see some weakening in the jobs report. Our expectation is you're going to see the unemployment rate move higher over time. And, once again,
Right.
we do expect the Fed to cut interest rates, but we expect the Fed to cut interest rates because we expect the economy is going to be weakening. They're going to be cutting with inflation above their target.
June 7, a late jobs report, Paul Sweeney.
Yep.
Change in non-farm payrolls now 180,000
Okay.
is the survey.
So, Drew, do you think the Fed here, do you think the Fed's kind of behind the curve a little bit here in terms of cutting interest rates? Or, a lot of folks will come in here and talk to Tom and I and say, hey, they should just wait here. How do you think about it?
I think there's an argument for waiting, but at the same point, the Fed's pretty much always behind the curve. There's no point in putting, a dachshund, against a greyhound and expecting the outcome to be any different, right? The Fed is the animal that they are, and they're going to be behind the curve. And the question is, how aggressive can they be when they don't know where things are going? And I think the answer is that they need to have a little bit more humility, which, I think if they had that in the first place, we probably wouldn't have had the inflation rates that we've had.
All right. So given that backdrop here, again, rates likely coming down at some point. Earnings seem to be pretty solid here. That seems to be pretty constructive background for equities. How do you guys think about that?
The problem is kind of, how much risk do you want to take when it seems like we're on the verge of a turn? And where will that turn show up? And will it be as obvious to everyone when it happens? We've been in kind of a risk-off mode for a while now, and I think that's served us well. And I think, that's probably where I would still be. Although I will say, when you're trying to figure out at the turn where you're going to be, there are places you can be where you actually, as soon as the turn happens, you want to be looking at those places. And so, we're trying to be or think about things in a more nimble way, and see, where the greatest mispricings are in the economy.
Drew, back to Colby College economics of a few years ago in your sterling career, there's a whole idea of aggregating all the data together versus 2, 3, or even 4 Americas. Are you disaggregating now? Are you looking at an America of haves and have-nots?
I've always been a fan of keeping the aggregate. And the reason being is because, if you disaggregate it in that way, you're basically saying that one group of people can't do a job that another group of people can do. And I think increasingly, we're seeing actually that, with new technologies, people can do things that, maybe they weren't possible before. The only reason to disaggregate now is because it seems like, the savings rate among one group, the higher end cohort, income cohort, is really strong, and there's some excess money there. And so we need to be, if we're going to see weakness, it's going to be there first, right? We already know there's weakness in certain other areas. But the people who drive the economy are the people who can change their savings rate. If people are going in and they're getting either government support or they're spending 100% of what they make, those people don't have the ability to adjust their spending. They just adjust what they're spending on. The higher income cohorts have the ability to actually, increase savings, decrease savings, which then boosts the economy or reduces the economy. The good news for the Fed, quite frankly, is 10-year yields are basically at the optimal point to maximize spending.
Interesting. Where are they going to be in 12 months? I mean, that's the ultimate call. And
so we actually think they're going to be relatively stable around here. But, once again, though, if they go higher, people begin to save because they feel the need to. If they go lower, they actually need to save more because people think about retirement and they think about the yield they're going to get in retirement. And so they adjust to try to basically get to an income stream in retirement. And that's the failure of the zero rate policy, is that if you push rates too low, it actually inhibit spending.
Drew Matus, thank you so much. With MetLife, thank you, Drew, for that research report from 8 years ago. That was just lovely. Futures at -20. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Jury deliberations resumed this morning in Manhattan in the criminal hush money trial of former President Donald Trump. We get the latest from Bloomberg law host June Grasso.
Before resuming their deliberations, the jury will hear a readback of testimony of Michael Cohen, the prosecution's star witness, and David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer. The testimony concerns a Trump Tower meeting in 2015 that prosecutors say was central to a criminal conspiracy to boost Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. The jury has also asked to hear the judge's instructions again. In New York, June Grosso, Bloomberg Radio.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is starting to regain his popularity after struggling politically for more than a year, outpolling main rival Benny Gantz for the first time since the war against Hamas started in October. A Channel 12 survey conducted of 500 voters representing a cross-section of Israeli society asked who is better suited to serve as prime minister. It found 36% chose Netanyahu and 30% Gantz. Early counts in South Africa's national election have put the long-ruling African National Congress at just over 42% of the vote, and it raises the possibility that it might lose its majority for the first time since it swept to power under Nelson Mandela at the end of apartheid in 1994. Finally, if you have a suspended license and you have to make a court appearance, here's a pro tip. Don't do it via Zoom while driving a car. A man in Washtenaw County, Michigan, learned that lesson the hard way when he did just that.
Mr. Harris, are you driving?
Actually, I'm pulling into my doctor's office, actually. Just give me 1 second. I'm parking right now.
Maybe I don't understand something. This is a driving while license suspended?
That is correct, Your Honor.
And he was just driving. He didn't have a license.
Judge Cedric Simpson not only turned down the public defender's request for an adjournment, he ordered Corey Harris to report directly to jail. He's been released on bond, and he's made national news now. Global news, 24 hours a day.
Like a family friend. For the old Detroit days.
Why in the world?
That was great.
Forget about any court appearance, doing it on Zoom behind the wheel. For the love of Pete, don't do it while you're up for a suspended license, man.
Michael Barr, thank you for the crime blotter this morning.
Lordy.
Good morning on YouTube, live chat, lighten it up. Good morning across the world. John in London. Having porridge and, Lisa picks up something healthy as well. I'm in the Piccadilly, I think it was, or Jubilee with young Pharaoh.
Right.
And he goes, let's get breakfast. And I'd never had this.
Oh, boy.
Greg's. John in London. Greg's, I'm sorry, it's the best. They cook them. It's like Dunkin' Donuts, but almost nutritious. They have the cheese and onion bake.
Nice.
The sausage, bean, and cheese melt.
Oh, I'll take that.
You have one, and then you're like, should I get two or can I embarrass myself and get five? The sausage roll. They have the margarita pizza, savory little bite, and the pepperoni pizza. Good morning in London to all of you joining us on YouTube. Greatly appreciate it. And on Apple CarPlay in the United Kingdom. Rich, can we get a Greg's like right over here? That would be, they can freshly bake it as well. Thank you, John. And on YouTube, remember, subscribe to YouTube. Search on Bloomberg Podcasts. Bloomberg Podcasts is how to get there. Futures negative 21. It's not like yesterday, but yeah, there's a weight to the tape. The VIX 14.44. Economic data in an hour, 15 minutes. Good morning.
Now, a look at some local headlines making news in the tri-state area. Harvey Weinstein may face new allegations of rape and sexual assault when the former Hollywood movie mogul is tried again in New York. It comes after a state appeals court tossed his 2020 conviction last month. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office says since the last trial, other women have disclosed being sexually assaulted by the defendant. The NYPD arrested and charged a man with a slew of hate crimes, including attempted murder, after allegedly trying to hit a group of Jewish teens with a car outside a yeshiva in Brooklyn. Several of them ran inside the yeshiva for safety. Police arrested 58-year-old Asghar Ali from Brooklyn. A study by a group which ranks U.S. metro areas based on pedestrian deaths finds that it is at a 40-year high. The nonprofit Smart Growth America blames roads designed to prioritize vehicle speed over pedestrian safety. Beth Osborne is the group's vice president of transportation.
We spent many years trying to speed up automobile traffic. The way departments of transportation have tried to do that is to make roads ever wider, and that alone creates safety challenges.
Beth Osborne with the SGA also says people of color are disproportionately impacted. Coming up, Bloomberg Surveillance continues with Tom, Paul, and Lisa. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by BNY Mellon's Insight. 3 days of countless opportunities to expand your knowledge and put your practice at the forefront of wealth management industry. June 4th through 6th in Nashville. Visit insight.bnymellon.com. All right, futures pointing to a lower open as investors, they come to this reality that rate cuts just aren't likely anytime soon with inflation still sticky. We have more economic data on tap this week. Today we'll get U.S. GDP numbers, a read on initial jobless claims, wholesale inventories, pending home sales. Tomorrow, though, it's the PCE deflator. Over to the futures right now. We have NASDAQ futures down 0.3%, S&P futures down 0.4%, Dow futures leading losses down 0.8%. The two-year yield, 4.96%. That's down 1 basis point. And the 10-year Treasury yield, that's at 4.59% after a 15 basis point jump in the past 2 days. More retail earnings coming in. We have Kohl's and Best Buy reported comparable sales the first quarter missed expectations. So Kohl's really taking a hit, down 18%. Best Buy down 1.5%. Then on the flip side, you have Burlington Stores. They're higher, up 12% after first quarter adjusted EPS beat estimates. We're not done yet. Later this afternoon, we'll hear from Costco, Gap. Then after the bell, we have Nordstrom, Ulta, and Dell. That is your Bloomberg Business
so it's a
Flash.
big day.
Big
Dell,
day.
We have Dell this afternoon.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. They're really linked to NVIDIA.
Yep, absolutely.
Interesting.
I mean, yeah, they had a nice run.
This is a great joy. He's been one of the great supporters of my work across Bloomberg Surveillance and all, going back to a stormy G7 meeting in Singapore years ago. I can say only with Douglas Irwin of Dartmouth does Barry Eichengreen hold the high ground on our study of trade, the mystery of free trade, going back to Ricardo. Professor Eichengreen of the University of California at Berkeley. His book, Barry, I can't believe I'm saying this, near 30 years ago, Golden Fetters, changed the dialogue on how we think about international economics. Barry Eichengreen, to begin, is free trade dead?
Free trade is not well, Tom, clearly, and good to be with you. I think the Biden administration not having rolled back Trump's tariffs, to the contrary, having escalated at least some of them, is a signal that we're in a new post-free trade era. I don't think we're going back to the Washington Consensus, which entailed free trade, anytime soon.
Do we fear the blocks of the 1930s? Can you link your world, Doug Irwin's world, going against the tide? Can you link globalizing capital or its failure over to political failure like the 1930s?
There is evidence in the data of friendshoring and nearshoring that globalization is being reconfigured, but I think our era is different from the 1930s in that the blocs, in our case, the US and China, are too deeply interconnected to decouple fully. So people understand that trade is being rerouted from China via Vietnam and Mexico, via third countries to the United States. And I don't think that will change absent a significant further escalation in the bilateral
the miracle. I remember Barry Eichengreen, John Lipsky in shock at the IMF as Vietnam decided to choose some form of their own capitalism. But does China, with its struggles, just diffuse its trade over 4, 5, 6, 8 other countries where we're still trading with China, even if we're not trading with China?
Yeah, I don't think the fact that trade between China and the U.S. is being rerouted really changes anything fundamentally. We still depend on China for imports of a wide variety of consumer goods that American households value, to a lesser extent energy and environmentally related goods. There are additional costs, additional inefficiencies from rerouting that trade through third countries, but nothing fundamental changes.
Barry, talk to us about the technology front. It seems like there is a building technological Cold War between China and the West. Do you see it that way? And if so, to what is that a concern here for global trade?
I do see it that way, and I think the outcome of that new technological Cold War is very much up in the air. The experts don't agree, and I don't yet have a view about whether China is going to be able to circumvent U.S. export controls, substitute for the advanced lithography machines that it used to be able to import from the Netherlands, and develop its own indigenous cutting-edge technology or not. But I think that tension and that Cold War between the two sides over advanced technology will continue because of the dual use problem. That technology useful for commerce and trade is also useful for military and defense, and how quickly China will be able to move upmarket to the frontier, if you will, is yet to be seen.
So, Barry, given that backdrop vis-a-vis China, what role does India play over the next, 3, 5, 10 years?
I think India will continue to play a subsidiary role. In other words, India has enough technological prowess to compete in a narrow range of software-related sectors. It doesn't have any capacity in hardware, in contrast to China, for example. Only a quarter of its population has high school degrees, so it doesn't have the ability to move big time into advanced services and even manufacturing. So India will be an important assembly platform. It will be important for a limited range of services, but it doesn't really substitute for China.
Barry, I thought this was a 1-hour conversation. They just told me we're almost out of time. Professor Eichengreen, your comment now to our listeners across this nation and around the world about keeping Chinese electric vehicles off the streets of Berkeley. I mean, this is like Ricardo, the failure of Ricardo. Why are we banning Chinese EVs off the streets of your Berkeley?
Well, I think the Biden administration is attempting to do this in order to build up indigenous capacity in the United States to produce EVs. I'm not convinced this is a good idea. I think Chinese EVs are still down market relative to what we do and what we aspire to produce in the U.S. I think the result of these tariffs will be to reroute Chinese EVs to Europe and European production to the United States. I don't think there'll be a major impact on the U.S. in the long run. If we're going to be competitive in EV production, we're going to have to grow that capacity at home.
Barry Eichengreen, thank you for visiting today. Professor Eichengreen at Berkeley, truly iconic on our international economics. Paul, you just wish whoever wins the presidency, they could get a cup of coffee with Barry Eichengreen.
Exactly.
Even bring on the young Turk from Dartmouth, Doug Irwin, and just say, okay, politicians, you've all got your certitude, but these guys have looked across 200, 300 years. I thought what he said there, the EVs was important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. We don't have any of the Chinese EVs in this market yet. The tariffs are being put in place, but a lot of folks are saying, don't we want to go green? Don't we really want to, put green technology throughout our economy? If so, then do you not want to have some of these international Chinese vehicles? I don't know.
There's just there's a way to do it where we boost our technology and we learn from what they're doing to do it even better, but you can't learn from it unless they're there.
Yeah, so we'll see. I mean, and then that begs the question, just for EVs in general, really, what is the ultimate demand in the U.S. market for EVs?
I'll say this book right now, folks. Doug Irwin, I mentioned up at Dartmouth a few years ago, like I can't believe how many, 20, 30. Professor Irwin, as a young Turk, wrote a book called Against the Tide. It is the definitive trade book. It's a rite of passage. You have to read Against the Tide if you want to play the game. And I'll put it out on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. What a joy to have Barry Eichengreen from Queen Victoria Street in London. We're on Apple CarPlay, or on Android, on YouTube. Thank you for the vigorous live chat. Headline, bulletin, red sticky. John in London likes Greg's. Good morning, John. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
All right, coming up in just moments, we're going to check in with our very own Kriti Gupta. Get her thoughts on kind of some global news.
How
Tom.
we let her run?
She's just, her people.
Her
she
people
said,
just,
exactly.
I can't believe
We're going to get a few minutes with Kriti Gupta to see what's going on. All right, coming up next, we're going to head over to London, check in with our good buddy Kriti Gupta, Bloomberg TV host, and get her thoughts on what some of the latest news coming out of London, coming out of Europe. That's coming up in just moments.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
In the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Rising Treasury yields, the latest comments on interest rates from Fed officials. Well, that really weighed on stocks in Wednesday trading. The Fed's Raphael Bostic said cuts could be possible in the fourth quarter if prices in the labor market move to a more, quote, stable growth stance. Right now, we have futures lower. Dow futures down 0.8%, S&P futures down 0.3%, NASDAQ futures down 0.2%. The 2-year yield at 4.96%, the 10-year yield at 4.59%. 0.5%. And a few companies making news. That's Palantir, up about 2.5%. The company won a $480 million contract from the U.S. Army to work on an AI computer vision project. And then you have shares of Moderna. They're higher, up nearly 3%. A Financial Times report said that the U.S. government nearing an agreement to fund a trial of its bird flu vaccine. And then today, Boeing getting ready to tell federal regulators how it plans to fix its safety and quality problems. Their shares up about 0.5%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene. And now we turn to the surveillance. Their election is so much more sensible than our election correspondent. Kriti Gupta joins us in London as we begin our coverage of an election that will be in 6 weeks.
July
Not
4th?
6 months.
No,
It's
exactly.
brilliant.
No, you're right. You're exactly right.
She's off the tundra of Texas, where they invented a 3-year election process. Kriti, what is it like to parachute into a 6-week speed election?
Tom, I am having the education of my life because not only is it the UK elections, it's the EU parliamentary elections, the South African elections, all at once, all market moving. And I think for the UK elections in particular, you got to know a little bit of British culture. You got to learn that here in the UK, they love to abbreviate things. There loves to be words like NIMBY or YIMBY.
Yeah.
Ask me what that means, Tom.
Is she getting a British accent? She sounds
Maybe.
a little bit like Julie Andrews.
She's been hanging out at the pubs right there.
She's like, she's over at Greg's ordering a cheese and onion, and she's getting a British accent. Kriti, are they relitigating Brexit in this election?
It's kind of coming up every once in a while, but it's still very, very, it's something that you don't want to bring up. One of the kind of things one of the conversations that are seeping in is this thing called for under 30s, which would basically mean that perhaps if you're under 30, if you work in financial services, for example, you may be able to roam between Europe and the UK. But again, it's not something that's gaining a lot of traction, but just something that is part of the narrative on the sidelines.
So, Kriti, what are some of the issues here? I guess the question, I had lunch with Sam Fazeli yesterday, Tom, and the question I had for him is, why is the UK, why did Mr. Sunak call this election now? What's the thinking there?
Well, the thinking originally on why he called the election was that inflation number. And again, this is just one thought process, that inflation was coming down, it's getting close to target, and therefore this is the right time to really be able to rally some of the voters around his economic agenda. But Paul, you asked the crucial question of what are they actually looking at? And I think housing supply is a real sticking point in this election. In the UK, it's very, very hard to construct new homes. It's hard to break down homes. It's hard to renovate. And that's where the acronym NIMBY really comes in handy. This is the word I learned this morning. It's short for not in my backyard. Essentially, if you have new housing, a lot of people push back if it's literally in their backyard. In Labour and kind of their campaign, they've really branded themselves as YIMBY, aka yes in my backyard. And that's where the Conservatives have said, look, this gets a little sticky when it comes to planning around that.
Kriti, an unfair question, but I'm going to go there. And you're going to be our UK correspondent here on this election over the coming hours until the election. But I think we're sort of learning who Rishi Sunak is, Prime Minister Sunak. But who's the other guy? Is he the second coming of Gordon Brown and Tony Blair? Sir Keir Starmer? Is he somebody really identified in the mind of the UK and frankly worldwide?
It's funny that you mentioned that. So Keir Starmer is, of course, the leader of the Labour Party, for those who aren't following this election. And his kind of real momentum at the moment is getting the business community on board. You mentioned Tony Blair as well. There are some real parallels being made at the moment in terms of the way he's approaching the business community. And I think that's what a Bloomberg audience needs to know here. There's this thing, again, I'm giving you all the Britishisms, Tom and Paul. You should be a fan of this. This is what I learned this morning. There is a thing here called, and I have to read this off my phone, the smoked salmon and scrambled eggs offensive. Oh. And this is basically, I know, can you believe that? And I'd say, why is it named after breakfast? And the reason is because Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, the shadow secretary, are trying to get business leaders on board with their economic agenda. This is similar to back in 1997 called the prawn cocktail offensive by none other than Tony Blair, getting the business folks on board. But I have to say, we got to balance this. The Conservatives have been trying to do that as well and really try to get them on board. The problem is there is no fiscal headroom. So any policy changes have to cost £0.
We bring in Lisa Mateo, surveillance breakfast correspondent. Lisa, smoked salmon healthy for you.
Oh
at
my
breakfast.
gosh, yes, great source of protein.
It's a
Great
great
source of protein.
Yes.
There you go, Tom.
They're very good. So I guess it's a
Pizza's
healthy.
Mike's source of protein.
It's a Paul. Save me, Paul. Jump in here with a UK question for the girl from Texas.
So, Critty, you've been in London now for several months plus. What's the feeling from the folks on the street? Do they feel like
Are they engaged in this? Great question.
Yeah, I mean, are they really engaged in this upcoming election here?
So 10 months and counting, by the way.
Okay, thank you.
I think literally today, 10 months. What I've learned in my time in the UK, especially during all these elections, is that a lot of eyes right now are on the US. And it's not even just from an election point of view in terms of this kind of Trump versus Biden show off. It's also a question of investment. There's a big conversation here around not just tariffs from a potential Trump administration, but what is the best policy here? Is it the big stick via Trump, or even the carrot, the sweetener versus the Inflation Reduction Act? The problem is you're not dealing with just the UK. You're dealing with 27 countries across the English Channel that can't even seem to agree on something as simple as a capital markets union, cross-border transactions. So that really seems to be the issue.
I know, Critty, you've left us all behind. You've forgotten about us. We're just,
it
doesn't matter. But in the zeitgeist right now, Michael Dell mentioned this to Ed Ludlow the other day. Texas is leading on green in America, just the might and the wind generation and all that. When I was last in London, Critty, I was floored at the buy-in on green. Have you seen that there? Have you seen just a radically different tone in the United Kingdom over green than versus what you've seen here?
Oh my gosh, it's massive. And I was really surprised by it because traditionally in the States, when someone brings up ESG from an investment standpoint, a lot of, I think, investors and even financial community kind of roll their eyes. In Europe, it's a completely different story. I'll give you an example. Just this morning, there was a story crossing the Bloomberg that the ECB is talking about imposing fines on banks that aren't addressing their climate pledge. Is monetary policy getting involved on the climate story? That's a big deal.
We got time for one more question, Critty, because I know, your people that need you. How many times a week are you eating at Greg's? I mean, that's been our theme this morning. Pharaoh turned me on to Greg's at the Jubilee Station. Are you going for the vegan sausage breakfast roll at Greg's or the bacon and omelet breakfast roll? Which one are you leading on?
Believe it or not, I actually haven't been to a Greg's yet, but I've got to say, every time I get a whiff of something kind of delicious in the office, everyone says it's Greg's, so I gotta check it out.
Okay, there you go. That's the plan for today. She'll get her interns.
Yeah, exactly.
Pick it up. Critty Gupta, thank you so much, and I really can't say enough about her work in London early in our morning, and particularly with Nathan and Karen Moscow. The stock report she's doing just before we come on is really world class. That is our surveillance. The election takes only 6 weeks, correspondent.
I know. Why do we?
Why?
I don't know.
Just can't say enough about this. Is the parliamentary system they have.
Yep.
They call the election, and they just do it.
Yep.
To me,
I'm looking at Greg's here, Tom. I mean, the sausage breakfast roll looks great. There's a vegan sausage breakfast roll.
Yeah, there is. I've never had that.
Maybe she could do that.
The steak bake, I don't think so. But this goes back to the pharaohs, like 16th century.
Yeah.
And this like simply creamy porridge. I mean, that's like they do. It's like a refined Dunkin' Donuts.
Michael Barr is going for the bacon and omelet breakfast roll.
He is, or two.
Yes, exactly. Let's be honest.
Sometimes you get three, which we call a brace of Greg's.
As a treat.
Good morning to all of you across the United Kingdom on Apple CarPlay, on YouTube as well. On YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Search there to get there to you. To search Bloomberg Podcast to get to Michael Barr with our news in New York City's well-fed Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. The first day of jury deliberations in Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial concluded with no verdict. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has an update.
Just hours after getting instructions from the judge, the jury had questions. The panel sent 2 notes to the judge, one to rehear those jury instructions and another to rehear select testimony from 2 key witnesses, former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker and Trump's former lawyer Michael Cohen. The jury wanted to hear more testimony about a Trump Tower meeting that prosecutors say was central to a criminal conspiracy to boost Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. Deliberations will resume this morning at 9:30 in New York. Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
A setback in the effort to exonerate Scott Peterson in the murder of his wife Lacey and their unborn son more than 20 years ago. A judge denied a request for new DNA testing on all but one of 14 items in the case. The Los Angeles Innocence Project argued some items could be connected to Lacey's 2002 murder, but the judge said the evidence presented wasn't enough to warrant a need to retest. Ashley Hall is director of the Forensic Science Graduate Program at UC Davis.
On any of these items, they are public, and they would have, if we found DNA at all, there's no way to say that it got there during the commission of this crime. Just the presence of DNA doesn't indicate a crime.
The judge also said some of the items are not available. 14 pro-democracy activists have been convicted in Hong Kong's biggest national security case. The court said their plan to effect change through an unofficial primary election would have undermined the government's authority and created a constitutional crisis. After a 2019 protest movement that filled the city's streets with demonstrators, authorities have all but silenced dissent in Hong Kong through reduced public choice in elections, crackdowns on media, and the Beijing-imposed security law. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom Ball, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Got to talk about it today. Big hockey game in New York. First time in years. 2-2.
Yeah.
Panthers are better, period. And, the Rangers got to get it done.
Yeah. Boy, they hit hard. They're aggressive.
I think Rich Truman just collapsed on the floor when you said that, man.
It's very cool. But again, I go, Rich, help me here. Game 7, if we go all the way, is July what? June 28th. We go almost to 4th of July playing hockey. That's stupid. I just don't get it. That's like doing
Even the
football
people in Canada
in February.
aren't thinking about hockey in that time.
As a native Detroiter, the mindset never leaves when you're thinking about hockey in Canada.
All right.
Yeah, that's our hockey coverage for today. We'll see what the results are tomorrow.
Go
We have
Rangers.
to extend our coverage here tomorrow. Paul, key economic data here, and again, the 10-year real yield, 2.23%. It's lifted up, but not through resistance. It's not into a new range of a higher real yield.
We're talking to, you look at the 10-year Treasury, 4.58%, 4.59%.
Really hasn't moved.
Ira Jersey will tell you the next resistance is 4.71% on the 10-year Treasury. So he's looking for a little bit move higher there. So, but yields moving a little bit higher here. We got the S&P futures down 0.4%. The Dow down 0.9%.
Oil gave it away. We had an 85 on Brent crude. We come back under 84.
Yeah, exactly.
$3.40
a gallon of gasoline down at the Jersey Shore. So that's kind of where you are there.
And DXY, the dollar showing, I'm going to say showing stability here. I mean, I'm so sorry, folks. We had Barry Eichengreen on, and we barely got to a dollar conversation because trade is so front and center with the two presidential candidates.
And Tom, let me give you a Bitcoin quote for you because I know you're just dying on that. It's up 0.75%, just under $68,000 per token for your Bitcoin.
When you go down to Nashville with BNY Mellon, are you wearing Lucchese's or Tony Lamas?
Boy, I don't know. There's going to be a whole outfit situation. I have to talk to Alex Steele about that. Exactly.
Okay, well,
we're going to have to coordinate.
You can see Alex is, she'll look like Porter Wagner, from the Opry from years ago.
Exactly.
Studded out. I mean, it'll be amazing.
We're going to get her to Cracker Barrel.
Futures, that'll be something. It's like Lisa Mateo going to Cracker Barrel. Good morning.
Now a look at some local headlines making news in the tri-state area. Manhattan prosecutors told the judge they are evaluating more claims of sexual misconduct made against Harvey Weinstein and could potentially seek a new indictment against the disgraced movie producer before his scheduled retrial on rape and sexual assault charges. Assistant District Attorney Nicole Bloomberg said that during a court hearing, additional people have come forward with assault claims. She said some potential survivors that were not ready to step forward during Weinstein's first New York trial may now be willing to testify. Police have arrested and charged a man with a slew of hate crimes, including attempted murder, after allegedly trying to hit a group of people with a car outside a yeshiva in Brooklyn. Cops arrested 58-year-old Asghar Ali from Brooklyn. Simon Gifter is a freelance journalist. He told ABC he heard the suspect ranting to cops from behind the precinct walls.
I was outside and I heard him screaming nonstop, like a maniac.
Asghar allegedly said to the teens, "I'm going to kill all the Jews." New concerns about the terror group ISIS-K. Police are on high alert after threats made against the upcoming Cricket World Cup on New York's Long Island. Authorities now say an extra 100 officers will be assigned to the event. Global news 24 hours a day. More with Tom, Paul, and Lisa. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures falling as high yield kind of sour the mood. We have NASDAQ futures down 0.2%, S&P futures down 0.3%. We have Dow futures down 0.8%. The 2-year yield 4.95%, down 1 basis point. The 10-year yield 4.58%, and that's down 2 basis points. Over to commodities, spot gold lower, $2,337 an ounce. Brent crude $83 a barrel. WTI crude $79 a barrel. News from Amazon raising its stake in Grubhub from 4% to as much as 18%. Now, this expanded partnership, what it means, well, it could make it possible to order takeout directly on Amazon's website and shopping app. So we have shares of Grubhub's Dutch parent JustEatTakeaway.com. They're up about 3%. Amazon down about 0.3%. Italian luxury sneaker brand Golden Goose launching a primary offering of $108 million in an initial public offering over in Milan. And then we take you from luxury sneakers to high-end sandals and clogs. Yeah, we're talking about Birkenstock. Posted robust earnings and raised its forecast for the year. Those shares up 8%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Okay. Tom and Paul.
We're going to continue here. Paul Sweeney, the Lisa Mateo report. Lisa, the first time I walked into a Golden Goose, ooh, I said, "Are you kidding me?" And they're doing an IPO and going ka-ching.
How much are those shoes?
They
gotta be ridiculous. Golden Goose.
They have a pair of Converse and they put a gold star on it and triple the price.
This is a whole new world for me.
I'm telling you, you got to get on the wagon here. Golden Goose.
All right.
But I don't know. It's either that or the Birkenstocks.
Paul,
where do you go?
It's like exactly. A pair of Stan Smiths.
Yes.
From years ago.
Right.
It's a Superstar LTD with blue leather star in detail with chains and pearls. First of all, they look like they're beat up. They look like Mateos run 400 miles in them. Please. And they're $895 for a pair of Stan Smiths. These guys are genius.
It's a great
sneak. Lisa, have you ever darkened the door of Golden Goose?
I have not, and nor do I plan to spend that much on sneakers.
You could go in, you walk around.
Especially if they look beat up.
Try to get out with no damage. That's our shoe report for this morning. Paul, seriously, economic data coming up, and it's not just PCE deflator. I'm really looking at personal spending.
Yeah, personal spending. It's interesting, personal consumption as well, Tom. I mean, initial jobless claims coming out. So a lot of economic data this week. And again, highlighted, as you mentioned, Tom, tomorrow with the PCE deflator.
Now, a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines from major publications.
Your daily look at the front pages brought to you by Golden Goose. Also, IBKR Financial Advisors switched to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost global trading and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges, no conflicts of your interest at IBKR.com/RIA. Thank you, Interactive Brokers, for your support. She's never been in a Golden Goose, but boy, does she have some newspaper stories today.
Or
What do you
nor
got,
will
Lisa?
I ever wear those. Good morning. Yeah. All right, we're going to start with this story. It came out yesterday. The New York Times, CNBC reporting Nelson Peltz no longer an investor in Disney. You remember the battle to get on Disney's board, right? He controlled $3.5 billion in Disney stock. So this is kind of taking that pressure off Disney. So a big part of his chunk was owned by Ike Perlmutter. He's a former chairman of Marvel Entertainment. So sources are saying that Peltz has now sold off his portion of those shares. But here's the thing. I mean, he's not going away empty-handed because Disney stock's risen about 15% in the past year. Sources are saying he sold his Disney stock at $120 a share.
Nice. Paul, jump in here. 10-year return on Disney is 3.75% per year for the last 10 years. What Peltz got out of this with a profit, right?
He did. It was amazing.
Did Iger get out of this with a profit?
Well, it's still to be seen. Al from Jersey, I'm not sure if he came out with a profit either. But again, this is just a real challenging issue for Disney and for the media industry in general, Tom. They're trying to figure out how do they make a business out of this streaming stuff.
I've always said this from day one. Lisa, help me here. They all came out with the streaming, and I'm about ready to cancel 2 or 3 of them. I mean, and I'm going mental this weekend. But the bottom line is Disney, I look at, is, okay, Star Wars and lots of Cinderella and all the rest for kids. What does the new Disney look like?
I think the new Disney looks like a theme park company with some media assets.
No, but I mean the streaming service.
The streaming services.
When you look at the chiclets on your TV,
well, you have
I know Hulu, I know Netflix. What's Disney?
Well, The Mandalorian is their big push too. I mean, that's
Star Wars.
Show's coming out. Yeah,
it's
but
all
that's
their
more
franchises.
for, like,
They're going to try to milk their franchises as they should because they have the best franchises in Hollywood. But even that. They've seen some pushback on some of their franchises that maybe they've overdone it, oversaturated it, so they pushed some of those movie releases back. But Nelson Peltz, he made a couple shekels on that investment.
Yeah.
Good for him.
Next.
Okay, you know that big, ginormous residential tower at
Ridiculous.
432 Park, okay? It's tall, it's thin.
The terrible shadow in Central Park. If you're lying in Central Park.
Shortly the tallest residential building in the Western Hemisphere, okay? It had people like Jennifer Lopez lived there, okay? So it had this big reputation. But now apparently it's going through some problems. It had a 2021 lawsuit, that condominium board that says there were noise issues, leaks, malfunctioning elevators. So the problem is that a lot of the people who owned are now trying to get out of it, and they're lowering their prices. So since the lawsuit, there's been a number of units for sale, homeowners unloading properties for a loss, even would-be sellers cutting prices.
Well, I'm looking for a unit there for Tom Keene. The building's penthouse.
Yes.
The building's penthouse was recently discounted to $105 million, down from the original asking price of $169 million. So I think we're getting down into the TK level here to get the penthouse, which does have phenomenal views.
What's great about it is if you're there, and I can take the Aston Martin across the street to the Aston Martin dealership.
Yeah, perfect.
There you go.
It's convenient. But this building, for those of you across the nation, this building is on Fancy Park Avenue, right down the street from James Diamond's new tower, and then farther up from Griffin's tower to be built over the next 6 years. The other towers, Paul, are sort of in the middle of nowhere on 57th Street.
I don't get it. And again, if you're sitting, if you're literally lying down in the park, Central Park, catching some rays on a summer day, the sun will be blocked by some of these buildings. It's just ridiculous. I mean, it
changed the whole landscape of the skyline too.
Don't get me going.
Yeah.
I'll get in trouble.
Oh, no.
Exactly.
Next, let's move on, Ms. Mateo.
All right, so how about this? Apple looking to kind of set aside its rivalry with Android because they want to put Apple TV Plus possibly onto Android. So this is a big thing. Bloomberg is saying there was a job posting that shows they were looking for the senior engineer to help build a television and sports app for Android. And the reason is because it competes with the iOS platform. So this is a big thing for Apple to go onto an Android.
Yeah.
So that's what they're talking about. But Apple TV Plus never talks about how many subscribers they have or how much revenue, but Android could really give it that boost because Android actually has more users globally.
Is that right?
Than Apple.
See, in the Sweeney household, we have one of our offspring is Android, and the rest
Just
are Apple.
one?
Yeah,
Is he like
just
the
one. And so he's shunned.
outcast?
He's not in any of the group
Yeah,
chats
but
because he's
his income is 3 times higher than everybody else's.
Yeah, he's at Lockheed. He's a rocket scientist, and he says it's superior to iOS, but we just look at him like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I get the same thing. What's interesting about this, Lisa, I'm so glad you put this in here quickly. Paul, this thing coming up in June with Apple.
Yeah.
And I think the bombshell is going to be with Google. That's my amateur,
absolutely. Yeah,
that's
so
my amateur prediction.
And as Tom's referencing, they have a developer conference June 10th for Apple, and a lot of folks are saying this is going to be the AI event for Apple.
One more quickly. Next.
Yes, sure. Screen time before bed. When do you turn off your screens? Is it like an hour, 2 hours?
No phones in the bedroom.
No phones in the bedroom. Good for you. Okay, because there was that rule, maybe 2 hours before bed to turn it off because it can. The problem is that it suppresses melatonin, so it doesn't let you fall asleep as easily. But now there's studies saying that might not be true. So some people could be more sensitive to the blue light than others. They're saying it varies depending on person to person. So you don't have to follow that rule if you want. There are some strategies. Here's what you can do. You can set an alarm on your phone so that it goes off when you have to go to bed. You turn off your notifications at nighttime. I know my husband's notifications wake me up in the middle of the night. I hate it. It's annoying.
Please.
And you can keep a sleep journal, Tom.
A sleep journal.
Sleep journal. Yes. You can say what works and what doesn't work for you so you can get some better sleep. Track it.
You can't even say it with a straight face.
No, I can't.
Because a sleep journal. Thank you so much. Which songs changed the landscape? 1978. Yep. This was revolutionary. An anniversary today for the great Cars of Boston.
I don't mind you hanging out and talking in your sleep. I guess you're just what I needed. Just what I needed. I needed someone to feed. I guess you're just what I needed. Just what I needed. I needed someone to please.
All right, coming up, we're going to check in with Russ Kosterich, Global Allocation Fund Portfolio Manager at a little firm called BlackRock. We're going to talk to him about where he's allocating capital these days. That's coming up in just a moment. This is Bloomberg. All right, coming up, we're going to get a little bit smarter on these markets. Got the S&P down about 0.4%. The Dow off 347 points. That's 0.9
Go to cash.
of 1%. NASDAQ off 0.3.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation's still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Bloomberg Surveillance with Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. We're all here. Control room is packed. Ken Felly, our global technical director.
Wow.
In the control room today.
Somebody else is driving today.
Yeah, it's got an intern.
Okay.
It's one of the interns. They're like moving things around.
Okay, he's pushing the button.
Ken's hungover. Futures at -21. The VIX 14.46. Yields have been the story, Paul. We haven't talked about it yet. The 2-year yield. I'm sorry, I'm with you. It's a benchmark. To go through 5%, it hasn't happened. 4.96%.
Yeah, that gets your attention. And we got the 10-year at 4.59% here. So we get a little bit move there. And I'm going to call it just WTI crude oil. We're just below $80, probably around $79 a barrel on WTI crude. I'm not sure where that whole supply demand is going. And for Matt Miller, of course, we call out Bitcoin. It's up 0.5%, just under $68,000 per token.
I mean, it's going to be interesting. We're on Apple CarPlay. We're on Android. On YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. Search to Bloomberg Podcast to get there. Bloomberg Surveillance today. Brought to you by BNY Mellon Insight. Let me spell it. INSITE. This is an incredible opportunity to network and hear from world-class speakers. Take your practice to the next level. June 4 through 6 in Nashville. Register at insight.bnymellon.com. Insight. INSITE.BNYMellon.com. And the major question is, if you and Alex Steele go down there, is she like, she in like Lucchese's or Tony Lama's or the fancy, the Sonoras or that, or Isabel Marant? I mean, what kind of boots is she going with down there?
She's going to have the boots. She's going to have the cowboy hat, the whole thing going on down there in Nashville. She's going to be kicking it up. So we'll have some fun down there.
I see her with the Grit Bronco boots, $1,400.
Yeah. Wow.
Really, you got to be kidding me. The name of the company is Kemosabe, Kemosabe. With our Bloomberg Business Flash, our Lone Ranger, Lisa Mateo.
You got it. Futures extending their declines. Treasury yields near the highest level this year. So we have NASDAQ futures down 0.3%. S&P futures down 0.4%. Dow futures down nearly 1%. The 2-year yield 4.95%. That's down a basis point. The 10-year yield at 4.59%, and that's down 2 basis points. Commodities, we have spot gold lower at $2,334 an ounce. Brent crude $83 a barrel. WTI crude $78 a barrel. And shares of software maker Salesforce on track for the biggest drop in more than 15 years. They're down 15% right now after it forecast revenue growth will stall this quarter, missing expectations. Then meanwhile, you have HP shares. They're up 4%, reported a net revenue beat. And then we get a ton of retail earnings today. We start with Foot Locker, up 13%, reported earnings surpassed expectations. You have Dollar General. They reported a beat too. They're up 2%. Coming up, we'll get to Best Buy, Kohl's, and yes, Cracker Barrel has also come out with their results.
Boy.
That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
I got the map out. Do you know there's 9 Cracker Barrels in the greater Nashville area?
Yeah.
So if you're there for 5, 6, 7 days, you can try
goodness.
a different one every day.
Exactly. And believe me, I will. I know where they all are.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be one's on Music Valley Drive, and it's good. I always say good morning. Joining us now for a really important conversation is a sophisticate of allocation. He's Global Allocation Fund Manager, BlackRock. Russ Kosterich joins us this morning. Russ, what at the margin are you changing right now in your allocation?
Hey, Tom, good morning. The short answer is not much. We have had a basic position, I think we've discussed in the past, for some time now, which has basically been modestly long equities, modestly underweight duration. particularly long-dated treasuries, and that hasn't changed very much. We make some adjustments at the margin, but I'd say the basic contours of the portfolio, being long the U.S., being long some of the mega cap growth names, that remains pretty consistent.
How do you sell? How do you lighten up? How do you measure the how muchedness of owning Dell out? Is it Lisa this afternoon? Dell's out with earnings this afternoon.
Correct. Yes.
Or Nvidia or the other tech wonder children. How do you do that, Russ? How do you measure how much to own?
Well, that's a good question. I think there are a couple of things that go into that. I mean, the first of which is, clearly there are a lot of strong factors driving the market right now. There are mega trends geared to artificial intelligence being the dominant one. But each of these companies still has an idiosyncratic business. We are overweight some of the Magnificent Seven. We are underweight others. But there are a couple of things I think we've been trying to do over the last year or two. One of which is we still think that many of these companies tied to long-term themes like artificial intelligence, they have further to run. So that is a dominant theme in the portfolio. Another way we're thinking about implementing this, which goes to the idea of how do you size this? We're still in an environment, despite the volatility of the last couple of days, where having option exposure is very cheap. So can you think about owning some of that exposure in these names in option form, taking advantage of that cheap vol, limiting the downside, but still being able to participate in that upside as many of these names just keep grinding higher.
All right, so Russ, let's think about this on a global basis here. Are we overweight U.S. versus rest of the world? Because a lot of folks are saying there's some real opportunity in, maybe international investing, maybe even emerging markets. How do you guys think about that at BlackRock?
Look, it's a great question. I'll tell you what we're doing in the Global Allocation Fund. We are overweight the U.S., and we've been overweight the U.S. for some time. And you get to that view in a couple of ways. I mean, the first of which is obviously the U.S. has been a remarkably resilient economy. And we see that month after month, it continues, and we expect that to continue into the end of the year. But the other reason we're overweight the U.S. is we think about the characteristics, the type of companies we'd like. I mentioned artificial intelligence, innovations in healthcare, innovations in cloud storage, in some of the energy names. More of these companies are in the U.S. than anywhere else in the world. So you can get to that overweight either from a top-down perspective or bottom-up. But that said, Paul, I do think there are opportunities in international markets. I don't have a table-pounding view that you go all in on Europe or other parts of the world, but we do see opportunities in luxury good manufacturers in Europe, in some of the value names in Japan. In terms of EM, I think that like a lot of investors right now, we're paying more attention to India as a place where we expect some long-term growth. And we also see a lot of very interesting bottom-up opportunities there.
I'm glad you mentioned Japan, Russ, because Tom and I, we've been noting that, we haven't talked about Japan much in 25 or 30 years, but it seems like in the last 18, 24 months, we talk a lot about Japan. Warren Buffett's, has talked about his investments in Japan. What's changed in your view about investors' perception of Japan?
I think a few things have changed. You're exactly right. And, Japan had been a rent not own trade. You went into that market when the global economy was inflecting higher. It was normally a 3 to 6 month trade, and then you sort of reduce that position. I think a couple of things have changed. The first and the most important, one of the two most important, is the inflation environment is normalizing, after many years, let's say decades of deflation. And while the rest of the world is wrestling with too much inflation, Japan's getting back to a place where it probably is a better regime than it was 10 or 15 years ago. Other big change, improved corporate governance, more of a focus on shareholder value, returning cash to shareholders. That is a big difference. And the third thing I'd say is one of the defining characteristics of Japan for years was that the marginal buyer was someone like us. It was an international fund. You're starting to see some change for a variety of reasons where there's more domestic demand. And that is a big shift from what we've seen the last 10 or 20 years.
Russ, to our listeners and viewers on YouTube who have some form of retirement plan, which is pretty much cookie cutter 60-40, is that a proper approach, or is that approach for the past, not the future?
Well, Tom, that's a great question. I remember, and I know you and Paul remember in 22, a lot of obituaries for the 60-40. And the truth is, it worked very well last year. It's been a little bit of more of a struggle this year, at least on the fixed income side. I don't think you throw it out, but I think you modify it. And I do think one of the things you've got to think about is the role of fixed income. As I said, there are places in fixed income we like. We like credit. We like spread product. We like the income you're getting, which is better than anything we've seen in 15 years. The short end of the Treasury curve, you were just talking about the 2-year at 5%. That's pretty attractive. Where I think we are shifting and where we have shifted is using long duration as a hedge against equity risk, something that worked remarkably well in the aught years, last decade.
Yeah.
It hasn't in the last 3 years, and it probably won't work until we get into an environment where inflation is more stable, and clearly we're not there yet.
Russ Kosrich, thank you so much with BlackRock. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. The jury in Donald Trump's hush money trial will resume deliberations after asking to rehear potentially crucial testimony about the alleged hush money scheme at the heart of the case. The 12-person jury met for about 4.5 hours of deliberations yesterday without reaching a verdict. The former president spoke to reporters outside the courtroom where he criticized the prosecution's case.
A lot of key witnesses were not called. Look at your list. Look at the players. And you know who I'm talking about. You can take 5 or 6 of them. Why didn't they call those witnesses? They didn't call them because they would have been on our side.
Court resumes today at 9:30 a.m. New York time. Conservative Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito says he can't and won't recuse himself from January 6th related cases. It comes after reports about the flags that have been seen flying outside his homes. Alito told congressional lawmakers his wife is solely responsible for flying 2 flags associated with the baseless Stop the Steal movement on 2 of the family's properties. Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson.
These ethics codes are asking whether or not it might appear to the public like a judge possesses actual bias. You don't need to, in the words of the Supreme Court opinions, actually possess the bias, but it has to look like you might. Justice Alito is saying that's not going to happen.
Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson. Finally, criminal charges against Scottie Scheffler have been dismissed, ending a legal saga that began with images of the world's top golfer being arrested and handcuffed in Louisville during the PGA Championship. The prosecutor said Scheffler's explanation that he had a misunderstanding with police directing traffic was corroborated by the evidence. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
And now the time where I read from a press release because I have no idea what I'm talking about. Paul, Dell Technologies and NVIDIA introduced Project Helix for secure on-premises generative AI. This happened like a week ago. And I guess they're going to do something here. This is Jeff Clark of Dell. Project Helix gives enterprises purpose-built AI models to more quickly and securely gain value from the immense amount of data. And I laugh, except we laughed at Dell 40 years ago.
We did, Tom. Tom, this stock has a market cap $127 billion. The stock's up 134% just this year.
You're talking about Dell.
Dell.
Yeah.
And up 286% over the prior 12 months. I mean, this thing has just become, it used to be a kind of a dumb PC kind of stock.
This reeks Michael Dell. Blueprint for on-premises generative AI. I don't know what to do, so let Michael Dell and Jeff Clark at Dell
figure it out
for me.
That's the take. And if you're
I think
Dell
this has
investor,
been way. Ed Ludlow doesn't care
yeah.
about this. I mean, he interviewed him, but he's like,
Yeah.
I mean,
so
these guys,
this has been.
Michael Dell's not wearing the shoes of the white soles.
Round Rock, Texas is where Dell is incorporated. 120,000 employees, Tom.
Good morning, Austin, Texas, and all. Dell this afternoon. Look for Carol and Tim with that coverage. Futures, -21 from New York City. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Now a look at some local headlines making news in the tri-state area. New concerns about the terror group ISIS-K. The militants are calling for an attack inside the U.S. Police are on high alert after terror threats were made against the upcoming Cricket World Cup on New York's Long Island. Authorities now say an extra 100 officers will be assigned to the event. Hundreds of thousands of people are expected to attend the tournament. A no-fly zone will be enforced. A nurse was fired by a New York City hospital after she referred to Israel's war in Gaza as genocide during a speech accepting an award. Hessan Jabbar was being honored by NYU Langone Health for her compassion in caring for mothers who had lost babies when she drew a link between her work and the suffering of mothers. High demand is predictably causing a shortage of some very popular drugs, including weight loss medications. Editor-at-large for Public Health at KFF, Dr. Celine Gounder.
GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, and Mounjaro are in shortages across the country due to their popular demand. Some companies are introducing supply trackers to help patients navigate the ongoing shortages.
Dr. Gounder spoke to CBS. Coming up, Bloomberg Surveillance continues with Tom, Paul, and Lisa. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures pointing to a lower open as investors come to this reality that rate cuts, well, they just might not be likely anytime soon with inflation still sticky. We have more economic data to focus on this week. Today, we'll get U.S. GDP numbers, a read on initial jobless claims, wholesale inventories, and also pending home sales. And tomorrow, we're on to the PCE deflator. We have NASDAQ futures down 0.2%, Dow futures down 0.8%, S&P futures down 0.3%. To the bond market, the 2-year yield 4.96%. That's down a basis point. The 10-year Treasury yield, that's at 4.59% after a 15 basis point jump in the past 2 days. More retail earnings we have. So we have Kohl's taking a hit, down 22% now. First quarter sales earnings missed estimates. Yeah, taking a real hit. Lowered its guidance too. Then you have Best Buy. They're up 5%. Reported sales for Q1 that missed expectations, down 5%. And then on the flip side, you have shares of Burlington stores. They're higher, up 13%. First quarter adjusted EPS beat estimates. And finally, Cracker Barrel. Yes, up nearly 2%. Reported adjusted earnings per share for the third quarter beat estimates because of the Country Boy breakfast. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa Mateo, thanks so much. What is this, Colby College Day?
I know. What is going on?
What is this? We can only talk to Colby College people?
They're small, but they're strong, Tom.
Drew
They're
Matus
everywhere.
with us?
I know.
Great soccer.
They're everywhere.
I mean, Premier League
too.
soccer.
Yep.
Mark Howard with us, BNP Paribas. Went to the Colby College. What was in the Kool-Aid at Colby College that made for such a cute thinking like I get from Mark Howard or Drew Matus? What was Colby like?
Well, good morning. Thanks for having me. Economics was a very strong department in the day. I think it still is as well. And that, we had a lot of students who wanted to learn. And you're in the woods and it's cold and you got to put your head in the books. So
there's nothing to do except study,
in
right?
The woods. Oh my God.
It's like Bowdoin Bates. I mean, there's just
Colby College,
warm as
University of
25.
Miami. What are you thinking? I mean,
no, you go to Colby and study. Look at or you go to Bowdoin and the rest. Mark Howard, BNP Paribas has such a heritage of a measured view on real GDP. Or nominal GDP. And yet here we are with this frothiness, this exuberance. How do you study that?
You do top down and you do bottom up, Tom. You integrate what our sector analysts are hearing and seeing and what the traditional and alternative data provide. Indicators like we hear from Kohl's and Salesforce and others, American Airlines, but then you also obviously do hardcore modeling of all the traditional data. And look at the inputs, see.
Where's your real GDP out 12 months?
I think we're in the 2% range, heading out a couple, into 2025, assuming just two cuts, one in December and one in the first quarter. And obviously no extraordinary event around the election or otherwise, but that's our baseline.
Mark, I'm pretty happy sitting here with my 2-year Treasury. My U.S. government's not going to let me down. I'm close to 5% here with my 2-year Treasury. What's wrong with that? Should I just sit there, or should I take some credit risk in the fixed income markets?
It's a good question, Paul. We if I could digress for a second to answer your question, we just hosted a large conference with super smart investors. Many of the guys you have on here, like Greg Peters and Assis Shah, Padro Salam from Citadel, and there was a very clear consensus that it's all systems go over the near term.
Really? Okay.
But they're also and you know, a new age for fixed income was one of the terms thrown out there, and so that would support just owning short fixed income, including spread product. But there was an undercurrent, and the undercurrent was that there's complacency out there. And I think we're starting to see that even in the last couple of days, where the market is turning more aggressively against those who miss, both in the equity market, but also the bad auctions we saw in the Treasury market this week. There's a growing sense of anxiety that it's not just about the Fed anymore. There's massive fiscal imbalances on the horizon.
But we haven't worried about that stuff in my lifetime. Why are we starting to worry about it now?
You know, it's a good question. I think number one, the data is much worse than we've seen since since end of World War II, frankly, for the U.S., but also other countries around the world, not just Japan, but Europe is spending like crazy to defend itself. And the fiscal imbalances there are quite massive, and in the emerging markets. So anyway, to answer your question, I think you're okay as a carry trade in the front end or even in the intermediate belly part of the curve. But there's a lot of anxiety about longer duration fixed income, including credit. Most of the buyers of long credit have been what we call immunizers, corporate pensions and people who are locking in, not because they like the back end of the market, but because it fits an equation.
Greg Villiers with a detailed essay today on the end, possibly, of the Trump tax cuts. Can you link our politics into investment analysis, or is it overdone?
I think you can link it, Tom. That's a great question. I'd like to see Greg's report because I think it would be very thought-provoking. The challenge is, I think most people have said, is that the outcomes are quite divergent, or the paths. I think, again, taking from our conference 2 weeks ago, there's very little conviction on which party is going to win the presidency. There's a sense that the Senate's going to switch over to Republicans. The House is a toss-up. That scenario makes it really hard to predict the policies that would drive markets. However, the one core tenet is that investors, leading U.S. institutional investors, are expecting deficits to continue to rise, whether it's tax cuts, which goes against what Greg said, or more fiscal spending. And so that's something that I think is weighing on these auctions, is people see deficits well into the future and are reluctant to fund it at yesterday's levels.
So at your conference, again, you had 550 investors, corporates in New York City. What was the thought about maybe just the U.S. consumer and how the consumer's doing out there? Because it seems to be the consumers that at the higher end who maybe have some equity exposure, or exposure to risk markets, including real estate, are doing fine. Everybody else, not so much.
Right. Yeah, there's real bifurcation there, Paul. And I think the concern is that there are many economic actors, particularly in the low-end retail sector, for example, that are really going to feel it as the low-end consumer feels some of the resets on their home equity lines or on their credit card bills, or certainly the stress in other borrowings that they have. And if we ever see a turn in the employment cycle, then they're really going to feel it. So I think there's a concern around consumers. But on the other hand, travel, leisure, other activities like that, really robust.
So we're Standard & Poor's 500 a year from now. Price that out.
Yeah, so Greg's got it at 5150, give or take, towards the end of the year, so no significant movement there to the upside. I think next year he would expect a generic increment of probably 5-10%.
Could you see, like, the afternoon show, Stanovic, Matus, Howard? I mean, it's all Colby.
Yeah, absolutely, all Colby.
Get Bob Diamond and you'll have a trifecta.
Yeah, exactly.
That'll be good. Mark Howard, thank you so much with BNP Paribas. Greatly appreciate it this morning. Got red and green on the screen. Got a little green from the small stocks, but it's all just fractional in the VIX. At 14.38 really shows the tension out there. Let's get out the date calendar. 6 minutes away, Paul. We get a redo of GP, second view of GDP. 1.6 was the number. Surveys less, 1.3.
Yep.
And we'll see from their claims. It's Thursday. It's Thursday today.
It is. I know. It feels. I guess it's a shortened week, so we're good.
It's a holiday lengthened work week. Yep. We get inventories. I don't care. Wholesale and retail. Pending home sales. That's going to be interesting.
But I just think initial jobless claims. It seems to be coming in at that Right now, the consensus for this is 217,000, but that's kind of where it's been for a
Drew
very
Matus said it
long
hasn't
period of time.
broken, and he says it's critical. It's been one of his foundation things.
Has it? Okay.
Weekly claims.
All right, and it's been pretty steady.
Really, yeah, it's steady. It's given away a little, but it's it hasn't fallen apart as well. And that goes into tomorrow with personal income, personal spending. I'm really looking at personal spending, and I guess
I'm doing my part. I'll tell you that.
The PCE deflator is there.
Yeah, I know. So we'll see. We'll see inflation tomorrow. Again, the PCE deflator, Tom. The core year over year, 2.8%. That's kind of the number. It's not 2%, but it's pretty close.
Getting out front of economic indicators, which we are wont to do. The 2-year yield, 4.96%. S&P futures at -20. Stay with us from New York City on YouTube. Apple CarPlay, Bloomberg Surveillance.
All right, coming up in just moments, we're going to check in with Gregory Daco, Chief Economist at EY Parthenon. We'll get a little preview of that PCE data that we'll get tomorrow that is key for this U.S. Federal Reserve. That's coming up. Let's talk economics. Let's do that today because a big eco calendar today. Gregory Daco, Chief Economist at EY Parthenon. He's going to join us. We're going to break down some of that economic data. We've got some jobless claims today. We've got PCE mañana.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We're just moments away from more economic data, including GDP, initial jobless claims. While we wait for that, let's check in with futures right now. We have NASDAQ futures down 0.2%, S&P futures down 0.3%, Dow futures down 0.9%. Over to the bond market, we have the 2-year yield 4.96%. That's down 1 basis point. The 10-year yield 4.59%. That's down 1 basis point. All right, we're starting to get the numbers coming in. We have GDP annualized. The survey was for 1.3%. Came in right on target, 1.3%. Personal consumption, 2.2%. That was the survey, came in at 2%. Then we get to the GDP price index. The survey was for 3.1%. Came in lightly lower at 3%. Initial jobless claims, that's what we want to hit, 217,000. That was a survey. Came up a tick higher at 219,000. Tom, what's your reaction to
My
that?
reaction, this is bond market comes in. I went to the Sweeney statistic, 2-year yield out to 4.98%, maybe not to 5, and it comes in 3 basis points, 4.95%. Yields come in a little bit, sort of a sigh of relief out there, Paul, but not enough. And the answer is we need more data. We're going to get that tomorrow.
We're going to get that data tomorrow, Tom, and it's going to be really the PCE deflator is what investors are going to look at because that's what the Fed looks at, Tom.
Yeah, my quick number here, is just like wicked amateur, folks. Okay, I take GDP, the second look, 1.3%. And the GDP price index, and Greg Daco is going to say, I don't know what I'm talking about, but the answer is I got a snapshot, 4.3%, some kind of nominal GDP out there, which, again, is not all that moldy. Futures, negative 15 now. They improve off the economic data. Our economic data here at Bloomberg Surveillance, always supported by the economic indicators in Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with the solutions they need to grow a thriving business. Commonwealth, go where you grow. Visit commonwealth.com to learn more. Thank you, Commonwealth, today. Thank you, Commonwealth, tomorrow as well. Tomorrow, personal income, personal spending as well. Greg Daco joins right now, EY Parthenon. Greg, it's a, quiescent, maybe doesn't capture it. It's sort of an on-plan report, but 1.3% real GDP, is that on the edge of stagflation?
No, I don't think it's on the edge of stagflation because of the composition of this GDP print. What we saw was, again, a very large trade drag, a drag from higher net imports. That is not necessarily a bad thing. It indicates that there was still demand from a consumption perspective, from a business investment perspective. So I think I would fade the headline GDP print, which is soft at 1.3%, and focus on final demand from private purchasers. That is still trending around 3%. It's still a robust economy, but we're seeing a little bit more scrutiny on the part of consumers in this high-cost environment.
Yeah, but this is religion to me, folks. We're talking domestic final sales as a general statement. It's something you flunk in Econ 101. Greg Daco didn't flunk it. But the answer is you peel out exports, you peel out the noise, maybe you peel out the silliness of inventory dynamics, and you got a run rate in America that Paul Sweeney sees every weekend of like a 3% GDP, right, Greg?
Yeah, you've got about 3% GDP growth when you peel out all those factors. I would also note that today we got the GDI report, the gross domestic income number, which rose 1.5%. So even though you have to nuance some of the underlying factors in terms of the headline GDP print, gross domestic income continues to point towards that softening momentum in terms of the economy. If you look at consumer spending data, also showing consumers exercising more scrutiny, being more careful as to what they spend on, and you're seeing the lower income consumers, younger generations, consumers that are more indebted, that are feeling the pressure of high interest rates and high prices and curbing their outlays in this environment. So that's what I would expect to see as we navigate into the second quarter.
As we do on surveillance, we go to the younger generation. Lisa Mateo, are you curbing your consumption?
I'm trying my very best. It's just not
failing,
working out
going
very
down
well.
in flames at it. Thank you. That's the last time we'll speak to the younger generation today. Paul.
Hey, Greg, talk to us about kind of your view of the consumer here. I'm just looking at some Kohl's numbers that came in weaker than expected. Target was also a little bit weak, but Walmart was okay. So, I mean, how are you guys viewing the consumer out there?
I think we have to depart a little bit from this view of the consumer. I think there are multiple types of consumers, and we're increasingly seeing a bifurcation in the economy. We're seeing individuals at the lower end of the income spectrum, those, as I just mentioned, that have higher debt burdens, that are perhaps maxing out on their credit lines, that have larger debt amounts and perhaps less savings to buffer any type of slowdown in the labor market, those are the ones that are a little bit more careful, more prudent with how they spend. That is gradually moving up into the income ladder. And if we do see, and I'm not saying this will materialize, but if we do see a more pronounced slowdown in the labor market, that could portend to slower income momentum and in turn force even a more pronounced slowdown in consumer spending activity, which by itself would actually be a good thing on the inflation front because it would promote those disinflationary currents that we've been seeing.
All right, Greg, given that backdrop, do you think the Fed should be cutting rates now? Or, like a lot of folks say, they should just be sitting on the sidelines and wait? What do you think?
I think a lot of attention, perhaps too much attention, has been given to this first rate cut. Nothing says that once the Fed starts to cut, or the ECB, or the Bank of England, or the Bank of Canada, they have to cut at every meeting or every other meeting. Nothing is predetermined in this environment. But I do think that if you look at the broader picture and have more of a forward-looking perspective with this view of the economy gradually slowing, disinflationary pressures still in the works, the Fed could very well start easing monetary policy now, take some time to evaluate how the economy is evolving, but be on the right step in the case the economy slows faster than what has been expected. We've been riding this good wave of robust economic data, painless disinflation. I think we have to be very careful to assume that this will continue forever. We are seeing signs of cost fatigue, high interest rates, more cautious business investment starting to weigh on the economy, and we have to be prepared.
And now, folks, home economics with Gregory Daco, EY. Greg, this is in the zeitgeist right now, and some of us are living it. I'm going to be an amateur here. Renters insurance is in CPI, but homeowners insurance sort of kind of like is not calculated in CPI. And I go to CPS reporting 4, 5, 6 months ago, the basic idea that 90% of the homes in New Jersey's Ocean County and nearly 60% of the homes in Monmouth County are at risk of higher insurance premiums. We go to our New Jersey premium expert, Paul Sweeney. What premium is homeowners premium right now in the premium state of New Jersey?
And I'm a solid 5 blocks from the beach, so I'm paying my fair share. My former home in California, Tom, it was in a fire area, so I was covered with regular insurance until about 3 or 4 years ago, and they said, nope, you're now in the fire area. So I had to go to Lloyd's of London to get insurance.
Did you?
Yeah, I mean, those are the people that insure ships that go like in the Red Sea.
Did you stop by Greg's and have an onion and cheese?
Exactly.
Greg Daco, this is ridiculous. Homeowners insurance. A guy like Michael Barr has been crushed with 6 deer in the backyard from homeowners insurance. Greg Daco, how do we put homeowners insurance that we're all getting killed on into CPI?
I think we have to be very careful with insurance in general, both homeowner insurance and car insurance, and wonder whether these are the types of pressures that the Fed should be fighting. Should the Fed be focused on these components of CPI inflation, of inflation in general, as to essentially try to curb inflation and bring inflation back towards that 2% target? There are open questions as to whether the Fed wants to squeeze other components to offset the fact that
they can't control that. Come on. There's no textbook you or I studied that says the Fed can surgically control selected inflation items.
Exactly. And you probably, given the blunt tools and the uncertain lags in terms of monetary policy, that's why I'm not necessarily sure that you want to have monetary policy remain higher for longer, tighter for longer in this type of environment where a large part of what's driving inflation today is structural by nature. Homeowner insurance prices are not rising because of inflationary dynamics, rather because you have climate change, you have conditions that are shifting. Same on the automotive front. Not necessarily sure that the Fed can do much about these types of inflation dynamics.
On this anniversary of the release of Just What I Needed by the Cars from Boston University and EY. Greg Daco, thank you so much. Just absolutely brilliant there. Great to hear from our surveillance younger generation correspondent. Lisa Mateo as well.
Of course.
Speaking of the younger generation, with our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Oh, you need to check those glasses. Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Jury deliberations resume this morning in Manhattan in the criminal hush money trial of former President Donald Trump. We get the latest from Bloomberg Law host June Grasso.
Before resuming their deliberations, the jury will hear a readback of testimony of Michael Cohen, the prosecution's star witness, and David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer. The testimony concerns a Trump Tower meeting in 2015 that prosecutors say was central to a criminal conspiracy to boost Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. The jury has also asked to hear the judge's instructions again. In New York, June Grasso, Bloomberg Radio.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken traveled to the Czech Republic today to highlight NATO's support for Ukraine against Russia's invasion. While in Prague, Blinken received a briefing from Czech defense officials on their efforts. The Czech Republic was the first country to send heavy weapons to Ukraine, including tanks, and Blinken said Czech officials have been going around the world to find the munitions Ukrainians need on the battlefield.
This is critical. By the end of the year, we anticipate that effort, led by Czechia, will produce nearly 1 million shells for Ukraine.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Early counts in South Africa's national election have put the long-ruling African National Congress at just over 42% of the vote. It raises the possibility that it might lose its majority for the first time since it swept to power under Nelson Mandela at the end of apartheid in 1994. Icelanders have unfortunately seen this movie before. Those in harm's way get out as a volcano erupts for the 5th time since December. Lava spews along a fissure now over 2 miles long in the country's southwest corner. This man is one of the first responders.
The Blue Lagoon was evacuated first, and there were a lot of guests there, probably around over 100.
Also, there were some people in the nearby coastal town of Grindavik moved out to safety. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Off the economic data, a better tape. We were negative 20 on futures, now negative 13. The VIX comes in appropriately, a little lower, 14.21. The Sweeney 2-year yield comes in nicely, 4.94%. I mean, you know, we swing the other way. Let's not oversell it, but, you know, we got to keep the ratings up.
Yeah, exactly right. 10-year
Let's
Treasury,
oversell it.
4.57% here. I mean, it's, you know, you ask a lot of folks, you know, where the 10-year is going to end this year. I've heard everything from 3.5% to 5%. I mean, there is, you know, a wide range of expectations where rates are going to go here, and I'm just not sure where my Federal Reserve is going to go. So I guess tomorrow, Tom, we'll get a little bit of a signpost here when we get that PCE deflator number.
And we got to get to June 12th.
Yep.
And the key thing to me is the jobs report. We've been waiting for what? 18 months for the labor economy to break.
Yeah, and with 3.9% or 3.8% unemployment here, folks tell me, you know, the economists tell me that the Fed wouldn't mind seeing something north of 4%, and that would give them some impetus to cut rates.
Drew Matus, I mean, claims there's, let's say, 200,000 for conversation.
Yep.
And we've backed up to 215, 218. I guess the vector's going in the wrong direction, but still, 5 years ago, you would have said that's a great statistic.
Yeah, and
it's
been
just one tea leaf.
And very, very consistent, Tom. It just seems like that's where the job market is. That's where the labor market is. And that $210,000, $220,000 number is kind of where we've kind of been.
But I get notes from listeners and viewers about how difficult it is out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to me, it's like two Americas.
It is. I think you're exactly right.
John Edwards got it right.
Yep.
We'll continue this coverage. Thank you, Commonwealth, for your support of our economic indicators. We'll do it again tomorrow at 8:30. Again, I'm really focused on personal spending. I'll let Mike McKee explain why I am, but that's where we are right now. Brent crude 83 down from the 85 level as well. A better oil statistic this morning. Dollar a churning, yen 156.72, euro a 108. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Now, look at some local headlines making news in the tri-state area. Harvey Weinstein may face new allegations of rape and sexual assault when the former Hollywood movie mogul is tried again in New York. It comes after a state appeals court tossed his 2020 conviction last month. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office says since the last trial, other women have disclosed being sexually assaulted by the defendant. The NYPD arrested and charged a man with a slew of hate crimes, including attempted murder, after allegedly trying to hit a group of Jewish teens with a car outside a yeshiva in Brooklyn. Several of them ran inside the yeshiva for safety. Police arrested 58-year-old Asghar Ali from Brooklyn. A study by a group which ranks U.S. metro areas based on pedestrian deaths finds that it is at a 40-year high. The nonprofit Smart Growth America blames roads designed to prioritize vehicle speed over pedestrian safety. Beth Osborne is the group's vice president of transportation.
We spent many years trying to speed up automobile traffic. The way departments of transportation have tried to do that is to make roads ever wider, and that alone creates safety challenges.
Beth Osborne with the SGA also says people of color are disproportionately impacted. Coming up, Bloomberg Surveillance continues with Tom, Paul, and Lisa. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures still in the red, and this is after some more economic data. GDP rose 1.3% annualized in the first 3 months of the year, below the previous estimate of 1.6%. We had personal spending advance 2% compared to 2.5%. And a shout out to R. Atkinson on YouTube in the chat, who says that Lisa's been consuming Nick's gear. Thank you. To the core PCE price index rose 3.6% versus 3.7%. And finally, we learned initial jobless claims came in higher than expected. 219,000 applications were filed last week. So now we have NASDAQ futures down 0.1%, S&P futures down 0.2%, Dow futures down 0.7%. The two-year yield 4.93%. That's down 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.57%. That's down 3 basis points. Who's making news? We'll start with Moderna. Their higher shares are higher, up 3%. A Financial Times report said that the U.S. government nearing an agreement to fund a trial of its bird flu vaccine. And then you have Tesla shares. They're higher, up 2%. Reuters reporting that it's getting ready to register its full self-driving software with China authorities. And this story stood out to me. John Lennon's guitar from the Beatles' 1965 Help album, well, it sold for $2.9 million at auction. You did. I'm sorry.
It's a baby Rickenbacker?
Yeah. It was found in an attic after being lost for 50 years.
Yeah. Wow.
So it was gone for a while, and now it's back. And it
back.
sold for almost $3 million. There you go.
It's probably the baby Rickenbacker. I haven't seen that story with the fancy knobs on it as well. We'll have to see. I'll have to do some research on that as well. What you do is when you buy a guitar or a bass guitar, you just move the decimal 2 points over, and then you lie to your other.
Right. Okay.
How much was that? Oh, that was $328. Thank you, Lisa Mateo. This is a joy. I want to give you a window, folks, into the linkages here of what we do on Global Wall Street in academics. When Paul and I were in our youth, there were firms that had incredibly extinguished research departments. And Paul, one of those was OPCO, Oppenheimer and Company.
Absolutely.
And they were absolutely first rate. Myron Picot was one of my heroes there. I read every word of it. And of course, we have John Stolfus on often. A guy named Stephen Robert invented that. There has to be somebody that goes out like Alan Schwartz at Bear Stearns and says, okay, we're going to hire these animals. And Stephen Robert, who came out of Massachusetts and out of Brown University, basically supported and nurtured forward what is world-class Brown University foreign affairs. They have announced Brown University School of International and Public Affairs in charge of herding cats at the School of International and Public Affairs is Wendy Schiller, and we are thrilled. Wendy, how much did you not want this new job as the interim director of the School of International and Public Affairs?
Well, good morning, Tom and Paul. Of course, I wanted the job. It's very exciting for Brown. So we're really excited to be a place that will be producing not only great undergraduates, but producing, we already do, masters in public affairs students, and being a player in trying to influence policy outcomes. So we're on our way.
You're on your way. Very, very exciting.
And I can still do Bloomberg.
And
it's good. I literally negotiated in the agreement with them that I could still do Bloomberg.
Very good. That's a key item right there. Wendy Schiller, we talked earlier about the death of the Washington Consensus, which Brown University nurtured forward out of the Cold War. Is the Washington Consensus dead?
I think consensus is on its last legs right now. We think in Washington, particularly on foreign policy. I think that's the thing to be most concerned about going into the election. We have the typical gridlock, oh, Congress doesn't work. But in fact, when Congress has to work, it does work. It does clear the debt ceiling. It does pass appropriations. It doesn't shut down. It'll pass, defense authorization, defense appropriations. It will pass aid to Ukraine and Israel. It will get there, not efficiently, but it will get there. The scarier question for us is if there isn't a unified voice between the administration, the executive branch, and the Congress on things like Russia, and whether we allow Ukraine to use American weapons to bomb Russia, or how far we push Israel or try to push Israel, that becomes confusing, not just for American voters, but for the rest of the world.
Wendy, coming up thinking about this election here, the Republican Party of my father that voted for Nixon and would vote for Nixon again if he ran today, where is that Republican Party gone and gone forever?
Well, in foreign policy, I think that Republican Party is gone. I think the last time we saw that Republican Party was really George Herbert Walker Bush, not even George W. Bush, even though Dick Cheney served in both administrations. That idea of international diplomacy, the idea of, using the UN, using NATO, really feeling like you are a partner and that you have a responsibility to address, particularly autocratic regimes. I think that's gone in the Republican Party. It's certainly not the loudest voices. I just think nobody is listening on that side of the aisle in terms of that kind of policy. And again, that's something to really think about. But the American people seem to want their politicians to focus at home, to focus on inflation, to focus on climate change, to focus on better jobs, better wages, better health care. They seem to be much more inwardly focused than we've seen in a long time.
And Wendy, Tom and I are here at 58th Street, but in Lower Manhattan, we've got a trial going on. We've got a jury sitting down, deliberating regarding a former president of the United States here. How does that figure into the calculus of November, do you think?
Well, Paul, I think when you think about being on jury, I've done jury duty. I don't know if you've all done jury duty. It's in that jury room, you're really trying to pay attention to what you're supposed to be considering, what evidence you can listen to, who do you believe? And you can get all these legal consultants to talk about it. But convicting a former president of the United States is a weighty proposition. It's a responsibility. It comes into play no matter how you want to think about it. You're still going to be on the jury, the first jury that convicts a former president. And I think that's probably weighing on the jury in some ways. And it's also complicated charges. So I think this is not as easy a case as people might have expected if they were thinking the prosecution made a strong case.
This is something. Can you see Wendy Schiller in a jury, with Lee J. Cobb, E.G. Marshall, Henry Fonda? It's something. Seriously, Wendy, a lot of our listeners, including me, I've never been selected for jury. What's the body language in a typical jury? Does the head juror run it? Who keeps score? Who runs the rule book in a jury like you've experienced?
Well, we had an excellent jury forewoman. And what's amazing is that it's an equalizer. You walk in the room and, maybe people know you, maybe they don't know you, but they come from all walks of life. We know that, people, there's still inequality in juries in terms of race and income. But generally speaking, I was not the forewoman. I didn't direct anything. I stayed pretty low, but people are they take it very seriously, whatever the charges are. And so I think that's the thing we don't quite understand about juries. What we think should be slam dunks, juries sit and really contemplate, and there are different opinions, and people are equal in their votes. So it's a really important process. It was instilled, as you very well know, Tom, in the Constitution for a reason. And it was a new thing to have people who are a jury of your peers when you are not lords and royalty. We were Americans. So it's a really important part of the process. And if Trump gets off, you can sort of probably attribute that to the fact that it's a jury trial and that, there was some hesitancy to convict a former president of anything.
Professor Schiller, thank you so much, and congratulations on your new position as Brown University moves forward their international relations and politics. Wendy Schiller is with Brown, and there's the break exclusive. She can still talk to us.
Yeah, I like
even
that.
Even with this, this new charge. I mean, that's very good. Futures were negative 20. There was a weight to the tape. It's improved. Futures negative 15. It gets better, but still there. I mean, to me, I'm sorry, Dell is like NVIDIA. Because NVIDIA, nobody knows what it is. Nobody can spell it.
Right.
It's a guy with a leather jacket.
Yep.
And Dell is like America.
Right. We know Dell PCs.
I mean,
I'm
going to be sitting there. Is this after the close? Lisa, Dell's after the close,
Yes,
right?
after the close.
So I got to sit there with a beverage of choice in my hand,
Exactly.
waiting for Michael Dell to tell me the world's all fine.
Absolutely. That's what you got to do here. It's going to be after the close today, Michael Dell. The stock, again, has just been a rip-roaring success here over the last 12 months. So just extraordinary. I'm not sure how many people saw that coming. I certainly didn't.
We're playing like the Cars. We're going to play songs from a few years ago with a beat. How about Billy Idol?
Oh, yeah.
Lisa doesn't know who Billy Idol is.
I do.
Good morning. Stay with us another hour. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Nice day to start again. It's a nice day for a white wedding. It's a nice day to start again.
All right, coming up, some very smart and informed discussion of these markets with Gina Martin Adams, Chief U.S. Equity Strategist at Bloomberg Intelligence. She's going to be in our studios in just a couple of moments. And we'll talk these markets. That's coming up. Coming up, let's call Global Geopolitics. John Lieber, he's the managing director at Eurasia Group. Those folks are smart. Global politics, geopolitics. We turn to Eurasia Group. That's coming up in just moments.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney. I think summer started. You know, I mean, I'm sorry. I'm there. I mean, you know, sometimes summer starts June 15th. Sometimes it starts.
Up in the Cape, up at the Cape in Nantucket, I think it's July 4th.
Yeah, it's July 4th.
Whereas Jersey Shore, it's Memorial Day.
I played music once. This is ancient history. This is like 4 lives ago. In June in Falmouth Heights, and there was sleet on the windows.
Oh, God.
You know, I mean, it's not the southern climes of New Jersey.
No, that's tough.
You know, but
they enjoy their summers up there.
Summer started. You know, Gina Martin Adams, Lisa, they're styling a summer look. You know, I mean, summer started. So we're going to get into it and sell in May and go away. What do you do this summer? We'll talk about that in a moment. Economic data out. It improves the tape. The tape was negative 20. SPX down negative 15. We'll get more economic data tomorrow. And that. Let's get to this quickly. There's so much to talk to Gina Martin Adams about. We're on Apple CarPlay and Android on YouTube as well. Thank you for the YouTube live chat this morning. Very, very informative. From the Interactive Broker Studios with a Bloomberg Business Update, Al Mateo.
You got it. Futures extending their declines. Treasury yields near the highest level in years right now. NASDAQ futures down 0.2%. Same for S&P futures. Dow futures down 0.7%. The 2-year yield 4.93%, down 4 basis points. The 10-year yield 4.56%, down 4 basis points. Shares of software maker Salesforce lower, down 16%. It warned the current quarter will likely see the slowest sales growth in the company's history. And then on the flip side, you have HP shares. They're higher, up 4%, reported a net revenue beat, and a ton of retail earnings. We have Foot Locker up 14%. Earnings surpassed expectations. Burlington stores higher, up 17%. But Kohl's taking a hit, down 23%. Slashed its guidance for the full year. Reported first quarter results that missed on just about every metric. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Rip up the script. Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney in Nashville, June 4 to June 6.
Yep.
Paul, you will go directly from Nashville to Paris.
I think I might have
for
to
our
now.
team coverage of a Macron-Biden state visit to France this before the Olympics.
That would be pretty cool. Macron to host Biden for state visit to France on June 8th. I bet you that's a great party. That's a great invite.
This is the first time I've ever mentioned my hotel in Paris because it's so damn sold out. I don't want anybody to know about it.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, team surveillance ensconced at the Hotel d'Aubusson on Rue Dauphine. I can see Lisa Mateo
right, well,
there.
I'll jet from Nashville to Paris. No problem.
You know, it's 18 euros to the Dior store. So, you know, Lisa's set.
That's big, though.
Biden will visit with Macron in
Very
Paris, June 8th. That's just coming across the Bloomberg headline service. A brilliant single line out on live chat. I just really can't say enough about some of the perspective we get out on YouTube live chat. Gina Martin Adams joins us, Bloomberg Intelligence. Quote, I can barely remember when the PE was 16.
Okay.
Thank you for that out on live chat. We're all living this, Gina. I mean, it was ages ago. What's the so what of that observation?
Well, okay, so I think the big so what of that observation is let's look a little bit deeper than the broad market PE. I get it. When you look at the S&P 500, PE looks high relative to the long-term trend. But you've got to consider the context of what that PE is, sort of what that PE represents. And the fact that tech is the only sector that's trading at a relative high compared to the S&P 500 tells you a lot about the concentration of that valuation premium. It also comes on the heels of an earnings recession, and I can't say this enough. Looking at PE in a period of time in which earnings have been very depressed for the rest of the sector gives you really artificial expectations as to the meaning.
Totally agree.
And I think you have to do a deeper analysis. So when we look at valuations, we look at everything from price to book to price to sales to EV to EBITDA. We look across the valuation spectrum, and we look a lot deeper than the headline because you're really getting a distorted view right now.
The heart of the matter on technology is the capital allocation delivers a capital efficiency and profit, whether it's EV to EBITDA or something more conventional. The firepower of those companies like Dell this afternoon is just extraordinary. And that's not in our equity memory, is it?
Right. No, and you really have to consider the context of the fact that these are companies that are earning a tremendous amount of cash flow. They're producing cash flow hand over fist at a time when they also have record levels of cash sitting on the balance sheet. They have this remarkable moat relative to the rest of stocks in the index. So their premium is extraordinary. They also, frankly, own all of the development right through into private equity. And I think this is something that we're working on, trying to capture how much of the valuation premium in tech is really related to the fact that they own all of long-term growth prospects. Microsoft owns, for instance, all the private developers of AI technology. Also, Amazon owns a lot of the private equity. Very different to the past, in which the large cap tech companies just simply own the entire value chain of development. They have some degree of skin in that game, which results in much longer term prospects for growth than I think many of us are able to sort of capture in traditional models.
You know, you go down to Bloomberg Intelligence floors, they're all wearing black robes and there's incense. And, you know, this is the kind of stuff. You and I are worried about what the economic data is tomorrow. And they're down there looking at 30-year Microsoft ownership.
Yeah, but you can't find management. So let's talk about tech. For 20 years, it's been the leader of this marketplace, it seems like. Just to me, I'm not okay. Why do we even talk about industrials and financials? I mean, I'm in my 401k. I just care about technology, don't I?
Yeah, you do, but I do think there's more to this market going on. You have for the last 2 years, for sure. Without a doubt, for the last 2 years, this has really been the only play in the large cap space is tech and tech adjacent companies, both on the downside and on the upside. They led the market correction. Remember that. They led the correction in 2022.
Yes,
they also led the recovery in 2023. So it has been the most profound driver of growth. However, tech went through a winter too, and we kind of forget this, but post the tech bubble, tech underperformed the market for the entirety of that recovery process into the great financial crisis. They've now led for most of the period since the great financial crisis, though it wasn't clear that they were leaders until the middle of the last decade. So I would call it a 10-year period so far in which tech has been the big dominant driver of most trends on the index.
When dot-com bubble burst, it took us 10 years for the NASDAQ to recover where it was.
Absolutely.
People forget about that. I forget about that. So when we think about tech, when we talk to Anurag Rana, Mandeep Singh from Bloomberg Intelligence, do we even need to differentiate between hardware, software, AI? I mean, how do you think about tech in general?
We do, and we actually do industry-level analysis. As a matter of fact, we released our sort of tech industry scorecards within the last week or two, and we're doing that across sectors. Our tech scorecard is really interesting right now because it is actually shifting incrementally more defensive inside of tech. It's saying, look, semiconductors have had their day. It's been a wonderful run on semiconductors. It's been incredible leadership by the likes of NVIDIA and the other semiconductors companies, but that particular segment of tech has now fallen toward the middle of our sector scorecard inside tech. I think that's a signal that maybe we get cooler growth out of tech in the short term.
What are some defensive names in tech that we're shifting into?
I
don't want you to
question.
buy, hold, sell, but what are some of those names?
Yeah, so traditionally where you look for defense inside tech, and you know I'm not allowed to make anything that sounds like a recommendation for a stock, but typically where you shift for defense inside tech is going to be services companies inside tech, as well as some of the software companies. I'd say software has been very, very hot, so I'm not convinced that that's tremendously defensive, but nonetheless, typically services and software prove to be more defensive type of investments in that space.
Never enough time. Gina Martin Adams, thank you so much. Futures at -16. He's got his Duolingo out. He's working on his French with Biden. Michael Barr with McCraw, June 8th.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. The first day of jury deliberations in Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial has concluded with no verdict, and they're about ready to start again today. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has an update.
Just hours after getting instructions from the judge, the jury had questions. The panel sent 2 notes to the judge, one to rehear those jury instructions and another to rehear select testimony from 2 key witnesses, former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker and Trump's former lawyer Michael Cohen. The jury wanted to hear more testimony about a Trump Tower meeting that prosecutors say was central to a criminal conspiracy to boost Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. Deliberations will resume this morning at 9:30 in New York. Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
Small diameter bombs are designed to be more precise than regular bombs, and now weapons experts say it appears as if one of them used by Israel in Rafah last weekend in an attack that killed dozens of civilians was made by an American company. IDF spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Nadav Shoshani.
We used 2 small rockets, 17 kilograms warhead, that were fired from aircraft to hit precisely. We've used this kind of munition before.
Sunday's strike ignited a fire that killed at least 50 people and injured more than 200 others. Months before the general election, about a dozen states have taken up legislation against so-called deep fakes in political ads. Colorado's governor signed a law this week requiring campaign ads with audio or video created with artificial intelligence to feature prominent disclosures. Ryan Kennedy studies the intersection of public policy and artificial intelligence at the University of Houston.
Policymakers have to chart this very difficult course between encouraging the development of what are quite useful technologies, while at the same time making sure that they aren't put to bad use.
Ryan Kennedy with the University of Houston. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Thanks so much. As always, Ian Lincoln, BMO Capital, out with a brilliant note on the economic data today. Quote, this brings a 4-week moving average claims, 22,000, rounded up 223,000, the highest since September of 2023. So, Paul, that gets some of the scope and scale of, yeah, things are more challenged, but we're really only back to September of 2023.
Yeah, I mean, he's calling it, some of the economic data we saw this morning, Tom, a bond-friendly round of data to start the day today. Q1 real GDP was revised to 1.3% versus the initial estimate of 1.6% here. So, again, looking at the 10-year Treasury, we do have the 10-year Treasury up 30 seconds, pushing the yield down about 5 basis points, 4.56% on the 10-year.
Sales to domestic purchasers moved lower from 2.8 down to 2.5. There's too many numbers in there. It's like a real job.
Yeah, he's got it. He does real work there.
Ian Lincoln, BMO Capital Markets, with a nice summary. We'll see many, many more of those out here within 2 days of economic data. Again, thank you to Commonwealth for supporting all of our analysis of economic data, including Michael. They're like, they get McKee Red Sox tickets. I swear they do.
Yeah,
exactly. I don't know what's going on there as well. We've got lots to talk about, but this is very exciting, and it harkens back to de Gaulle and to a relationship which has at times been very fractious. The President of the United States will visit Paris, and he will meet with Mr. Macron. You've got to believe that is a state visit. This before the Olympics.
Yep.
Olympics, I'm going to say late July. And this is on June 8th. This has been very sudden. I wonder how quickly this was put together.
Yeah, it feels, I mean, again, you got to think this is going to be a very high-profile event for both sides. But again, as you mentioned, Tom, just right before the Olympics, when everyone will converge upon Paris.
Mr. Macron in New Caledonia, they have had some real serious problems in one of their, I'm going to say, colonies as an amateur, deep, deep into the Pacific. And I know he flew out there as well. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Now look at some local headlines making news in the tri-state area. Manhattan prosecutors told a judge that they are evaluating more claims of sexual misconduct made against Harvey Weinstein and could potentially seek a new indictment against the disgraced movie producer before his scheduled retrial on rape and sexual assault charges. Assistant District Attorney Nicole Bloomberg said during a court hearing that additional people have come forward with assault claims. She said some potential survivors that were not ready to step forward during Weinstein's first New York trial may now be willing to testify. Police have arrested and charged a man with a slew of hate crimes, including attempted murder, after allegedly trying to hit a group of people with a car outside a yeshiva in Brooklyn. Cops arrested 58-year-old Asghar Ali from Brooklyn. Simon Gifter is a freelance journalist. He told ABC he heard the suspect ranting to cops from behind precinct walls.
I was outside and I heard him screaming nonstop, like a maniac.
New concerns about the terror group ISIS-K. Police on high alert after threats made against the upcoming Cricket World Cup on New York's Long Island. Authorities are now saying an extra 100 officers will be assigned to the event. Coming up, Bloomberg Surveillance continues with Tom, Lisa, and Paul. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures, well, we're pointing to a lower open. We have NASDAQ futures down 0.2%, S&P futures down 0.3%, Dow futures down 0.8%. Over to the bond market, we have the 2-year yield 4.93%. That's down 3 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.57%, and that's down 4 basis points. Commodities, we have spot gold higher at $2,342 an ounce. Brent crude, $82 a barrel. WTI crude, $78 a barrel. More retail earnings. We have Best Buy up 7%, better than expected profitability in the first quarter, even as it extends a sales slump. And then you have fancy sandal and clog maker Birkenstock. Those shares up 12%. Posted robust earnings, raised forecasts. I cannot see you in a pair of Birkenstocks, Paul. Sorry.
Right.
And yesterday we told you how Abercrombie & Fitch blew past estimates. Well, now we get another apparel retailer, American Eagle. They're not doing as well. They're down 9%. First quarter net revenue missed estimates. Morgan Stanley actually flagged the underperformance of its Aerie brand on top of it. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Right, Lisa, I mean, down at the shore,
there's
I
plenty
don't know,
of
April to October, nothing but sandals.
Yes.
That's it. That's just how it rolls.
There is a photo.
Flip-flops.
You got to do
Flip-flops?
Yeah, that's how we roll.
Yeah,
April through October.
Yeah.
But the Birkenstocks?
No, not the Birkenstocks.
And
Tom,
I saw
maybe the
Doc
Birkenstocks
Martens. Doc Martens
Yes.
really reported some challenges, to say the
correct.
least. They're not working. Birkenstocks, yes. Doc Martens, no.
You're going to have to change up the footwear, Tom.
We are lucky. We are fortunate. John Lieber's scheduled here to speak of Europe. He's with Eurasia Group, and of course with immense perspective. But we are going to rip up the script. John, the President of the United States will visit France. I don't know if you've seen this, but just moments ago they announced June 8th, literally in 2 weeks, Macron to host Biden for state visit. I went back and looked, John Lieber, and from my childhood, there was an absolute majesty of a very young World War II veteran, John F. Kennedy, and his wife is celebrated within Paris in 1961. The dining room table in the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles in 1961 looks like the Mateo house on any given Friday. John Lieber, how fractured is our U.S.-French relationship now as President Biden visits Paris?
You know, there's a lot of issues that divide the Americans and the Europeans right now. Macron's been one of the most kind of aggressively leading voices saying the West should do more. I mean, it kind of, sometimes he says this, and sometimes he doesn't, but the West should do more to help Ukraine, and that Europe should do more to prepare for Russian aggression. in the absence of the United States. So that's certainly going to be one of the focuses of their discussions, with President Biden trying to reassure him that the United States' commitment to NATO is strong, that Biden will be there. But of course, we have the backdrop of the election, so Biden can't really make that promise, and that's a huge part of how the French are thinking about this right now, because they don't know who their partner will be on the other side of the Atlantic in 8 months.
In 1961, we were arguing about airplanes over France on different military affairs and that, and of course the distraction for the French of Algeria and the rest. John Lieber, what is the special I hate this phrase, special relationship.
Right.
You never hear John Lieber or Ian Bremmer use that phrase. And yet we talk about it with the British. What's our special relationship with the French?
Yeah, I mean, France is kind of another country to the U.S., right? I mean, it's not the U.K. It's not Canada. It's not even Mexico. It is a European power that is important because of its centrality to Europe. It's not Germany, which is one of the U.S.'s, obviously the economic powerhouse of the European Union. But it is it's diplomatically important. I mean, it is a little, and obviously the reason that Biden is going there is to celebrate a great moment in American history, which was the D-Day invasion in 1944. And that's what this is about. And again, to tie this of course ties back to the presidential campaign. President Trump had a not so great moment visiting Normandy while he was president, which I'm sure will be played in the media while Biden is visiting the beaches in Normandy.
I had the honor of speaking with the historians Rick Atkinson when President Obama visited Normandy. That was really something, John Lieber. This is extraordinary. It's going to be 80 years. Do I have the math right?
Yeah, gosh.
80 years since D-Day. John Lieber, on a campaign basis, what images, what film does President Biden want?
He wants to show himself presiding over a commemoration of one of the great moments in American history and the great sacrifices made by people of the generation kind of slightly above him to secure freedom in Europe. And that's what he wants this narrative to be about. I'm sure that there will be a lot of messaging and imagery about the U.S.'s commitment to defending Europe. And that includes, of course, Ukraine from Russian aggression. And this trip is going to pack a lot of punch and has a lot of symbolic meaning beyond just what it means for France because of how it's going to play domestically.
Hey, John, I'm assuming, as you just mentioned, one of the agenda items for this meeting in Paris will be Ukraine. What is the latest thinking from Eurasia Group about how the Ukraine might play out here? Boy, it's been such a long time here, much longer than I think everybody thought we'd be discussing this.
So the thing that we're watching most closely right now is kind of what the West's long-term commitment to financing the war in Ukraine looks like. And the U.S. has recently re-upped its financial commitment to Ukraine, which gives them a chance on the battlefield that they wouldn't have without the material support from the West. And the next question is going to be, can the G7 get an agreement to use the proceeds from frozen Russian assets to provide an ongoing lifeline of financial support for Ukraine that goes well into 2025? That question is probably going to be decided this summer. And it's going to be an extremely material for the battleground impact because the Ukrainians simply can't fight without that money. Right. And if they don't have the money, then it means the Russian offensive is going to continue and probably win. And then, of course, the other major element we're looking at is the U.S. election because the U.S. is so incredibly central to that support.
John, unfair question, but let's end it with this. I feel like it's Unfair Thursday. In the zeitgeist of European media, I'm going to say led by the wonderful Telegraph of London, is the fact our eastern border with Russia now, with Finland, Sweden, down to Poland, is really massively under-budgeted and under-defended. Do you agree with the sense of that statement?
I think, the Russian military has quite a few advantages over the West right now, including just people, willingness to fight in people. And, they've got a massive population they can draw from, and Putin politically benefits from this conflict with the West. So it's hard for me to say if the U.S., if the Eastern Front is under-resourced, but politically, the Russians clearly have the will to continue this fight. And I think that's the political will that we really have to look to in the West and question.
John Lieber, well timed. Thank you so much for Rip Up the Script there. John Lieber of Eurasia Group, just fabulous there as the president travels to France for D-Day and to visit a state dinner, I believe, with Mr. Macron.
Yeah, and I had not made that D-Day connection, but perfect timing and full of symbolism, as John Lieber was just mentioning. But there's some real issues, Tom, I suspect they're going to have to discuss as it relates to geopolitics on the European continent. And obviously, top of the agenda will be Ukraine.
I didn't think about it, but what if the president decides to take a dip in the River Seine before the Olympics?
Before the Olympics, just to show that it's safe, maybe. If not,
get the presidential floaties on and swim down the River Seine, show his vitality. John F. Kennedy would have done it. He would have done it with Vigor.
Vigor. That's right. Exactly right. So we'll see. But again, and I just look ahead to these Olympics, and I just, you just hope the security is going to be solid because it has the backdrop to be just one of the most magnificent events. You think about the Olympics in Paris.
And a rebuild of Notre Dame. They're not in a big arena, folks. And I've got this third hand.
I'd love to visit that.
They're coming down the river with like an Olympic promenade.
Okay.
And I assume past Notre Dame.
Yep.
Which is just.
I'd love to get an update on where they are in the.
They're just now opening up. I'll be honest, I haven't seen the images.
Yep.
I didn't get there the last time.
That was heartbreaking.
There's a vector. Dior is this way, Notre Dame is that way. So we never got there. Please stay with us. We need to get the markets open. Futures at negative 16. The VIX 14.30. From New York City, key economic data tomorrow at 8:30. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. Good morning.
All right, we're going to get these markets open for you in just a moment. Today with Aoifinn Devitt. She's the Chief Global Strategist at Moneta Group. We're going to get her thoughts on these markets. Where is she going here as we await the Fed? That's coming up. Coming up in this half hour, we're going to check in with our good friend David Gura, host of Bloomberg The Big Take podcast. He's at the courthouse in Lower Manhattan for the Trump trial, the deliberations. We'll check in with him.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney with your opening bell report. Now, we received some more economic data this morning for investors to kind of digest. GDP rose 1.3% annualized in the first 3 months of the year, below the previous estimate of 1.6%. Personal spending advanced 2% compared to 2.5%. And initial jobless claims came in higher than expected. Let's get to the market reaction as we get things started on Wall Street. We'll start with the S&P 500. Down 0.2% at 5,252. We have the Dow down 0.9% at 38,084, and the Nasdaq down 0.2% at 16,880. We'll take you over to the bond market. The 2-year yield 4.93%, down 3 basis points. The 10-year yield 4.56%, and that's down 4 basis points. Looking at commodities, we have spot gold higher at $2,344 an ounce. Brent crude, $82 a barrel. WTI crude, $78 a barrel. At the open, we want to check in with Salesforce. They're down 18%. And we're in the current quarter, likely to see the slowest sales growth in the company's history. So they're taking a hit. But HP, on the other hand, up 7%, reported a net revenue beat. That is your opening bell report. Tom and Paul.
John Tower, Citigroup, Lisa and Paul, out with a sell on Cracker Barrel. He was there.
Oh, boy.
He says guidance forward looks good. They're making menu adjustments, including the hot honey sweet heat new bee sting chicken.
Nice.
It's tenders drizzled with a sweet heat honey glaze and served with country sides. It's available for a limited time.
That's what you got to do. But see, I go for the country boy breakfast, and I get the country ham. That's your meat choice. You have country ham, bacon, I don't know what else. But I get the country ham, and then I get the biscuits and gravy.
Does it come with the hot honey, though? What is the hot honey?
The hot honey, it's a sweet heat honey glaze.
Ooh.
John Tower puts on 10 pounds every time he does a road show with Cracker Barrel.
Yep, so we'll have to see here.
It's your Cracker Barrel report for today. Thank you to John Tower at Citigroup for that securities and bee sting chicken analysis. This timely interview coming up, we are going to consider the legal issues of Lower Manhattan. David Gura there. I think June Grasso's. Is June scheduled to be with us as well? Did we talk to her people? Are we? I think
she does the afternoon shift.
Yeah, I don't know.
But we got David Gura. He's going to be in studio here.
Right now, Aoifinn Devitt joins, Chief Global Strategist, Moneta Group, with a really, really solid understanding of the turn of markets out of the United Kingdom. Aoifinn, thank you so much for joining right now. Can we sustain global nominal GDP? Can we keep this good feeling going?
It's going to be difficult to sustain that. I mean, we clearly have exceeded expectations in terms of where GDP has been. Coming down to 1.3%, I'd say that's in the category of nothing to write home about right now. So definitely is more muted and perhaps more in line with how the economy should feel after it's just experienced a soft landing. We know that it's quite mixed, so that number, as a top line number, will perhaps distort quite a bit of variability behind the scenes among different sectors. So no, I'd say we're pretty much holding on by the skin of our teeth to a positive number right now.
How do you define stagflation? Do we know how Jamie Dimon defines it, Paul? I don't think we do.
No, he's still building a big building on Park Avenue.
People throw this thing around, and I mean, we're talking here with somebody with some qualifications, including Trinity College Dublin, a school called Oxford. She's done pretty INSEAD in France. I mean, even how do you define stagflation?
Well, I suppose I would like to say I was born in the era when it was last popular. Stagnation plus inflation. That's my understanding. It's been forecast for most of my life, but it hasn't actually transpired. And I'd say now we're hardly on either side of it. We're seeing neither stagnation nor are we seeing persistent inflation any longer. So I'd say that term has perhaps lost its purpose just at the moment. We have other problems certainly ahead of us, and that is how we deal with perhaps not having had this fallout, not having had this recession. How real essentially is this growth? You mean, and how sustainable is that? But I'd say inflation for now is somewhat in the rearview mirror.
All right, if that's in the rearview mirror, Aoifinn, as a chief global market strategist, where do you see opportunities on a global scale?
Well, it's interesting. We've always been global investors, and that has been a very difficult position to maintain because we have had high conviction outside the US, even at a time when the dollar was strong and there was persistent underperformance. So what we are cheered to see is that there has been this broadening of the market strength. And we still see that, even though that there's been a comeback in the last few days, we can see that there has been a broadening beyond tech, a broadening beyond large cap only into mid cap, into small cap, and certainly beyond the US. We've seen some decent performance out of Europe, decent performance out of the UK, finally, after lagging for about 14 months there. And then, of course, stellar performance from Japan and resurrection of hope and expectation around China post-COVID and post some of that overhang. So I'd say we're seeing this kind of commonality now of themes on a global basis. Where do we see opportunity? We see it in the divergence, in the fact that the dollar cannot stay long forever. We've seen some weakening there. We start to see divergence among central banks and how they're likely to perform, who's going to go quickly. When I say perform, I mean what they're likely to do in terms of the interest rates. ECB likely to go before either Bank of England or the Fed. That's leading to some divergence, which will manifest in the currencies. So that's where we're seeing it. And then, of course, you have single stock areas like, say, the Novo Nordisks of this world that clearly are stellar success stories. And if you do not have global exposure, you do not have the optionality that exposure to that would give you.
But I think if I were a portfolio manager, even, I think I'd be very lazy. I think what I would do is just go buy big tech and then stick my head in the sand and hope for the best. I mean, and that's kind of worked for me, I guess.
We should never underestimate what's sitting in a room and doing nothing, I think, which is always been perhaps a good response and riding out some of this volatility. The problem with that is this is a momentum trade, and chasing momentum has often ended in tears for investors. So we have not been too tactical, tried to be too clever around this momentum. We're even seeing signs of that spending is highly selective right now, that if we look at CapEx beyond spending, say, on cybersecurity and on tech or on AI investments, CapEx is actually coming down in other areas. So that's the story for corporates. That's the story for consumers. We see that in the Salesforce numbers, in the American Airlines numbers. And it'll be interesting to see what Costco comes out with today. But I suspect on the food side, people are still spending well. Yep. But selective spending is the order of the day. So there will be some cracks in the AI thesis because, quite frankly, no one really knows where we're going with this in terms of its impact. There's a lot of hype and momentum. Right. So all in there would be a precarious position.
Across a kitchen table. And Aoifinn, I mean, if in the United Kingdom, you've brought in some Greggs, the cheese and the onion roll, and you're there with tea, not coffee, I'm sorry, brown stuff. But Aoifinn, if you're there across a kitchen table right now and you've missed this equity surge, how do you get into the market into the summer of 2024?
Great question. Well, first, you get in how you always get in, which is gradually and staggering entry. And I don't mean staggering as if you consume too much of that ale, but staggering in the way we all dollar cost averaging. And that is, of course, how you do it. You definitely want to have that spread out around the time of a geopolitical event. We have elections in the UK on Independence Day on the 4th of July. There'll be elections here in early November, in the US in early November. So clearly we need to be mindful that those events are likely to cause some volatility in markets. And we're already seeing that in the volatility in fixed income. That will manifest in equity markets. So you stagger entry, you then make sure that it is broad-based across sectors. You don't try to be too tactical because ultimately we can't predict where different sectors are going to be, but we do know that certainly by the way passive is performing, that is certainly a broad-based exposure is the way to be.
Aoifinn Devitt, thank you so much. Chief Global Strategist, Moneta Group. Just love to have her on this morning. We're open for trading. The Dow negative 300 to make it a negative 329 on the Dow. SPX down 16. It was down more earlier on futures. Came back with economic data a bit. The VIX does better, 14.11. And the 2-year yield, 4.94%. Yields come in a little bit as well. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, and Lisa. Jury deliberations resumed today in the hush money trial of former President Donald Trump. Yesterday, the jury asked to review testimony about a Trump Tower meeting that prosecutors say was central to a criminal conspiracy to boost his 2016 presidential campaign. We get more with the Bloomberg News senior editor, Bill Ferries.
This was the meeting where David Pecker, the publisher of the National Enquirer, said that he agreed to help the Trump campaign by boosting Trump and his newspaper, criticizing his rivals, and basically buying and burying accounts of extramarital affairs as they came up. So this gets right into the heart of the payment to Stormy Daniels, and also the earlier payment to Karen McDougal, another a Playboy playmate.
Bloomberg's Bill Ferries. French President Emmanuel Macron is set to host his U.S. counterpart, Joe Biden, next week. The two presidents will discuss the need for continued and unwavering support for Ukraine. Biden's first state visit to France will take place on June 8th. Finally, America, it's time for our favorite game. He's doing what? A Michigan man had a Zoom court appearance for a suspended driver's license. Corey Harris appears before a Washtenaw County judge. And now, studio audience and home audience, you can play as well. He's doing what?
Mr. Harris, are you driving?
Actually, I'm pulling into my doctor's office, actually. So just give me 1 second.
Recordings from Judge J. Cedric Simpson shows Harris on his phone camera wearing a seatbelt driving a car. Judge Simpson then played the celebrity version of he's doing what?
So maybe I don't understand something. This is a driving while license suspended?
That is correct, Your Honor.
And he was just driving, and he didn't have a license.
Judge Simpson revoked Harris's bond and ordered him to turn himself in. Global News, 24 hours a day, whenever you want it. Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thank you so much. I think the birth date matters. The president was born November 20, 1942. Mm-hmm. And he is really the last of, he was an infant.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
This is not Bob Dole. This is not George Bush Sr., but he is truly the last president with any memory.
Right.
I mean, I'm assuming his first memories are 47, 48, 49 after the war. But to be born then, and the equity markets off the famed Ibbotson chart, Roger Ibbotson at Yale University, I pin it when I speak about this from what I call the Guadalcanal Low, which was 1942.
Yep.
He was born at the Guadalcanal Low. Guadalcanal was so difficult, we didn't tell America for, I believe it was 6 months.
Right.
It was that difficult, but to see President Biden travel, I don't know if he's going to Normandy. I haven't briefed yet. Gura hasn't briefed.
You might know. Yeah, they'll know. We'll find out.
Gura's got his bags packed.
Francine will be over there. She'll be, I'm sure.
Yeah, it'll be team coverage. Yep. Francine Lacroix, David Gura. I can see it. You know.
Well, I just remember, my parents were the World War II generation, and they'd have these dinner parties, and their friends would come over that they've known forever, and they were all veterans. They all served, and they didn't say I was in the Army, I was in the Marines, I was in the service.
Yeah,
that term doesn't exist really anymore. I don't hear it anymore.
And many of them were wounded. I have many recollections of fathers.
And they did toasts at their dinner parties for the folks that didn't come back. And again, they all grew up together. They went to grammar school together. They all went away to a war together. And some of them didn't come back. And I remember those.
And to your great insight, they had different politics, but they could talk at the dining room table.
Yes.
That was a big difference.
Yep.
Is they had a dialogue,
and they had that shared background, that shared experience of World War II, I think, and the Depression as well. They had that shared experience.
And they had cigars.
Yep, exactly.
Let's do a data check here and move forward. The Dow -324, SPX -12. It's a better tape than it was 2-3 hours ago, but nevertheless, a wait to the tape. I'm focused on Dell earnings. I'll be looking. I can't, honest to God. Austin, Texas. I can't remember the last time I looked at Dell earnings, but they really carry some weight today. And that'll be interesting, particularly after with Salesforce.
And Mr. Dell, just for what it's worth, because I like to look at this function on the Bloomberg terminal, Rich Go. He's number 11 globally in terms of global wealth. So good news from Michael Dell.
He's done a huge philanthropy down in Austin, to say the least. From New York City on YouTube, stay with us. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Now we'll look at some local headlines making news in the tri-state area. New concerns about the terror group ISIS-K. The militants are calling for an attack inside the U.S. Police on high alert after terror threats made against the upcoming Cricket World Cup on New York's Long Island. Authorities now say an extra 100 officers will be assigned to the event. Hundreds of thousands of people are expected to attend the tournament. A no-fly zone will be enforced. A nurse was fired by a New York City hospital after she referred to Israel's war in Gaza as genocide during a speech accepting an award. Hezan Jabbar was being honored by NYU Langone Health for her compassion in caring for mothers who had lost babies when she drew a link between her work and the suffering of mothers in Gaza. High demand is predictably causing a shortage of some very popular drugs, including weight loss medications. Editor-at-large for Public Health at KFF, Dr. Celine Gounder.
GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, and Mounjaro are in shortages across the country due to their popular demand. Some companies are introducing supply trackers to help patients navigate the ongoing shortages.
Dr. Gounder spoke to CBS. Coming up, Bloomberg Surveillance continues with Tom, Lisa, and Paul. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got red on the screen, NASDAQ futures, the NASDAQ down 0.2%, the S&P 500 down 0.3%, the Dow down 0.9%. The 2-year yield 4.93%, the 10-year yield 4.57%. What's moving the markets? It's Kohl's down 24%. And then on the flip side, you have Foot Locker. They're up 30%. And finally, on the retail side, you have Best Buy. They're higher. Best Buy up about 11%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
This is a joy. And this started with Matthew Winkler years ago, where Bloomberg decided we would cover law. Our Bloomberg opinion is world class, led by Noah Feldman of Harvard University. But part of it is having people that go beyond competence. And at this moment of a trial in Lower Manhattan, we're going to get to June Grasso in a moment with Bloomberg Law. But let's get right to it. David Gura is downtown at the trial. Mr. Gura, do you suggest we will see a jury verdict today?
Your guess is as good as mine, Tom. But the jury has once again gone into the courtroom to hear from the judge. As you may have heard yesterday, they put forward a few notes to the judge requesting some information and reading of transcripts from the proceedings that took place here over the last few weeks. So they've been brought back in. The judge is going through the requests that they've made. First of all, they wanted some headphones for their laptop. He has granted that request. They're going to be able to take those back into the room with them. But really key here is a reiteration of the charges against the former president of the United States. There was a lack of clarity about what exactly the law said about what the former president faces. The judge is going to systematically read through about 30 pages of text that he went through yesterday morning. So getting back to your initial question, Tom, that's going to take about an hour to an hour and a half to do. And then there was one other note centering on testimony related to a conversation that took place in 2015 involving David Pecker, who is then the publisher of the National Enquirer, Michael Cohen, and Donald Trump. There was some debate among the lawyers about what from that testimony could be read back to the jury. It sounds like the judge has said that all of the requests made by the jury will be fulfilled. So we will have a court reporter reading back transcripts to the jury again for about half an hour or an hour this morning, Tom.
One final question, David Gura, with your busy morning there. From where you sit and with all you've done in your political work, is this a normal jury? Is this a typical jury?
We have no reason to think otherwise. So it's a jury of 12, as it always is. 7 men from Manhattan, 5 women, and 6 alternates who are in the courthouse behind me, Tom, but not in the jury room itself. They have to wait here in case they're called into service. But, you know, they represent a broad swath of the city in which you live. They are a jury of peers. And from all that we've heard, all that we've seen, they're approaching this diligently, have been paying rapt attention throughout all the testimony, again, that lasted 4 to 5 weeks. So they are doing their civic duty, as so many juries across the country do. And again, no reason to think otherwise, that they are not bringing to bear just a strict reading of the evidence they've seen and the law. And I will say the judge yesterday, in giving them the charges in this case, was very emphatic that they should really put politics aside. As he emphasized at the beginning of this trial, it's not about that. It's about the charges. It's about the evidence. It's about the law itself. That's the guidance that you gave them, Tom.
David Gura, thank you so much. Downtown as a jury deliberates. There's a real issue here. My first interview that was ever done of me, inflicted upon me at Bloomberg, I was sweating bullets, Paul. I go in on an evening night.
Yep.
And I have to speak to June.
Oh, boy.
I was so nervous.
Good luck.
She is bulletproof. She was at Wellesley after Mona Lisa Smile, wandered over to Harvard Law, and provides expertise on Bloomberg law that is world class. Why don't you bring?
May I come back every morning now, just to hear this?
Exactly. June Grasso, she is the our Bloomberg legal analyst, host of Bloomberg Law on Bloomberg. June, can a jury of his quote-unquote peers in Manhattan convict a former president?
Well, they can. The question is, will they? But you can see that already. And this is such a highly educated jury. I have never seen a jury this. You have 2 lawyers on, which is really unusual.
Yep.
You have MBAs, people with doctorates. So this is such a highly educated jury. Yeah, it's incredible, really, when you look at I've never seen a jury with these kinds of educational stats.
Yeah.
So now the thing is that they're already confused about the jury instructions. They want instructions about falsifying a business record. I brought you here, Tom, in case you want to peruse it. I brought you 50 pages of the jury instructions. The judge read these to them yesterday, and in New York, the jury can't take these instructions back. So they hear these complicated instructions, and then they get back to the jury room and they've taken notes, but it's so difficult. For example, if you want me to go about falsifying business records, which is the main, because this is a felony, they want to make it into a felony according to the prosecution. It's a bump up. So it's falsifying business records with the intent to commit another crime, which is New York election law.
Yep.
And New York election law, you can't conspire to promote an election by unlawful means. They have to be unanimous with that, beyond a reasonable doubt. But unlawful means, they have different choices for unlawful means, and they can come out, they can use the business records, the tax records, election law. I mean, it is confusing. No matter how educated you are.
And this, as I've heard from, and I watch all my legal shows for my entire life, you can't trust these juries. You never know what's going to happen with a jury. Is it possible? I mean, you only need one person, presumably, to say, I don't believe the evidence or whatever, and then the former president can be exonerated. Is that?
Well, not exonerated.
Or found not guilty.
He'll not found not guilty either. It's a hung jury. It's a hung jury. It's a mistrial. And in an ordinary case, he would be retried by the prosecutor. I mean, prosecutors sometimes don't retry cases, but big cases like this, they would retry him. However, now you come up against the election. Are they going to be able to retry him before the election? I doubt it. And after the election, we don't know what happens. So that's the problem here. But just one juror. And what I want to thinking, and it's a fool's errand to try to figure out what a jury's doing, but I'm going to do it now.
Please.
So here you have, if this jury had come in, and sometimes juries often, they come in and take a vote, sort of like you see in initial vote. First vote. Where do we stand? And if they all said, we stand on convicting, they wouldn't be taking this much time to have evidence.
So you're guessing there's a split jury right now.
I think
I want to say 2 things. First of all, Paul Sweeney looks like the second coming of Paul Drake on Perry Mason a few years ago. But June, I want to get to the jury, and you've made this huge observation that this is a hugely educated jury. What's the so what of that? Because every jury I've been on, they never pick me.
They don't
I show up
pick
like
me.
this, and they're like, "See ya."
Well, it's just that you figure that with an educated jury, they could get through this complicated. And the facts of the case aren't complicated. You hear what it is. It's about there was a conspiracy, there was a payoff, and there was a cover-up.
Do you know their politics? Can you tell? With the body language to the jury, she's there. She's taking notes. She's in the front row. June Grasso, can you hint at their politics is they go into a jury where they're not supposed to be political.
Well, that's so difficult to do. And that's one question you can't ask the jury. What they do is they ask them things like, well, where do you get your news from? And a lot of these juries get their news from the New York Times, MSNBC, CNN.
Anybody from Fox?
Well, yes.
Wait.
One of the jurors gets his news from, according to what they said, gets his news from Truth Social, Donald Trump Truth Social.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And also said he follows Michael Cohen on X. So
nobody said Bloomberg Surveillance. Damn.
I would have been hoping for Bloomberg Law before
Right,
Bloomberg
exactly.
Surveillance. But anyway, because there are two lawyers there, right?
did.
So, I mean, it's very hard to tell what their allegiances are. Though people have been reading what's going on in the courtroom. There's an article in Bulwark where people are saying that there's a problem with one of the jurors because he smiled at there's this parade of GOP
And
leaders.
he smiled at one of them.
He smiled at one, and also that he apparently nodded his head
Yeah, but
up
that
and
happened
down.
in the Henry Fonda movie. Isn't that normal?
I have to listen to that, watch that Henry Fonda movie again. I mean, it could mean anything, but they're zeroing in on this one juror, and as Paul said, it only takes one. That's the prosecution's problem. I'm curious as to why they let that particular juror on the jury.
Yeah.
Why they didn't
Paul
use a
Drake,
perjury.
ask a question.
So from what I've read, the prosecution did a good job in presenting its case, and again, what I've read, in most cases, it seems like they did their job. They made their case, but this is obviously not a normal case. It's not a normal defendant, and there are other issues, whether it's politics or involved here. So there's really is no way to predict this.
There's no way. The prosecution did make their case. They not only made their case, but they backed it up. They made their case with Michael Cohen, and they made their case without Michael Cohen. So taking that out. And what's interesting is that what they're asking for here, they're asking for testimony, readbacks of the testimony of David Pecker, the publisher of the National Enquirer, and Michael Cohen. And if you remember, during the closes of the defense said, you cannot believe Michael Cohen. He's the biggest liar, the greatest liar of all time. Could have been the greatest lawyer, I don't know. The greatest liar of all time. So, but they wanted to hear from him. In
a jury, forget about this case. I don't want to even frame it around the case. When there's argument, who tries to, there's one or two people that aren't on the majority. Do they try to convince them to come over?
Yes.
Who does the convincing?
Well, the jurors who believe that the case, so let's say you go in there and there are two people who vote for not guilty.
Yeah.
So then the 8 jurors try to, for example, they're saying, well, let's hear the testimony of this person. They're trying to convince them, perhaps, or that person, or the people who are the not guilty say, I want to hear.
Just because of time, June, we have commercials, June,
Right.
unlike you
Oh,
on
okay.
Bloomberg
Oh,
Law.
we have
You go on
commercials,
forever.
too.
but very quickly here, I think this is important. If in a polarized America, with this polarized trial, do you have any belief that somebody's going to, quote unquote, convince somebody to go this way or that way?
I think it's possible. And what happens is what we call, it's an Allen charge, it's the dynamite charge, we call it. If they say we're hung up, the judge tries to convince them.
Are they sequestered or are they in a motel on the way out to LaGuardia?
They are not sequestered, which
Why
I'm a
not?
little bit surprised. I don't understand why. But also I don't understand why the law says you can't send the jury instructions back.
What happens on Bloomberg Law tonight? You've
talk
never
about-
been in this
we
early.
ta-
so,
we- Just for you, anytime you want, I'll come in. We're going to talk about this, and I'm also going to be talking about Justice Alito saying I'm not recusing myself.
with his
Big
wife
surprise.
and the flag
With
thing.
the flags, yes.
Okay,
yes.
isn't her
The
cover?
wife's in charge of the flags? Is that the defense, I think?
Is what? Yes.
The wife's in charge of the flags. Okay.
He's blaming it on his. But that's another story. Blaming it on his wife is
Can I
another
come
story.
in? Can I come into Bloomberg Law sometime and you can
Yes.
interview me again, as nervous as I was the first
Absolutely.
time?
Now I'm the nervous one. Absolutely. Anytime you want.
I was.
He was
I
smooth
don't
as
believe
can
it.
be.
Yeah, I
He
know,
was
I
smooth
know.
as
And then
can
it got
be.
worse. After June Grosso, I had to be interviewed by Charlie Pellet.
Oh well, that was a chore, I have to say.
My agent said you cannot be interviewed by John Tucker. That'd just be too much stress.
Tom is an expert on a particular type of law.
Yeah.
We won't go into that.
Ooh.
Thank you there.
We'll talk afterwards.
We'll talk afterwards. June Grosso, thank you for coming in Thank you
Anytime.
for coming in before 11 a.m. We greatly appreciate it.
I am here late. I am here late at night. Okay, people.
Yeah. Oh, please. Iconic with Bloomberg Law. Look for June Grosso, seriously, with the nuances of our fractured legal system. The Dow is fractured down 367 points, 38,000. We may get a 37,000 print on the Dow here at some point. 5,300 on the SPX, down 13 points as well. The VIX 13.88 with that key economic data tomorrow. We'll have all that for you. David Gure is downtown at the court as a jury deliberates. Again, look for June Grosso, Bloomberg Law this afternoon. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.